Hey Outlaws, it's Joe here. I'm coming at you with another unsolicited movie review, this time for Avengers Infinity War. So no spoilers, but what I will say is that the Avengers Infinity War, in a nutshell, it signifies, in my opinion, the maturation of this style of movie. I started on the Marvel Cinematic Universe back in like Iron Man days, early Iron Man days. I remember Iron Man was a fun movie, but wasn't really all that much to write home about to me. And then there was just several missteps as they tried to take themselves seriously. And I think that really recently with Thor Ragnarok, they learned that their audience as well as their artistic vision is much helped by a sense of humor that even in its serious scenes never takes itself seriously. And so we see that the entire universe is in the peril of being totally annihilated by Thanos, the father of Gamora. If you are familiar with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, that would be the green girl. And anyway, Thanos is trying to find all these Infinity Stones, which actually pretty neatly interweave into the other stories, like Vision, who has one of the Infinity Stones. Doctor Strange has another one, and they all sort of like represent what the special powers that superhero that's holding the Infinity Stone controls. And then there's several other ones that have other narrative functions and as well as, you know, functions within the comic universe. But I was kind of impressed at how they connected all these stories so well and in such a really deeply in a very deeply integral way. So it was really cool that way. But as I said before, it really the sense of humor is what elevates the Avengers Infinity War, because its subject matter is kind of dark. Thanos wants to get control of all these Infinity Stones so that he can like basically roll a die. He's like the version of Two-Face in the Marvel comic universe, where he thinks that everybody deserves a coin flip, and heads you live, tails you die. It's kind of a bizarre and delusional, plot for the supervillain to take. But they definitely play around with that throughout the movie. And overall, I think that this really is that maturation of the cinematic universe. You're seeing them comfortable with taking narrative risks, even though, the underlying idea of just having a story where all of the superheroes are, from all these different IPs are all together in one. I mean, that idea is not super, innovative. It just seems like trying to sort of meld together their audiences. But the way that they've handled it here I really think, they've created something totally unique and something where what was going to happen left me at the edge of my seat. And, I look forward to seeing where they're going to head with it. So I know that seems kind of wishy-washy and strange, but, like, I did not anticipate I was going to like this movie. I thought, like, oh, everybody's saying it's okay, and I'm not that big into the comic book movies, the superhero movies. I struggle to get my wife to watch them, and I have a hard time, going to see them on my own, or, it's one of those things where they just don't really work out. But I was really happy that I got to go see the Avengers Infinity War. So I hope that will be the case for you. If you choose to see it, you probably have already seen it. So anyway, let's get to talking about board games. This is going to be episode 165. We're going to talk a little bit about tabletop taxonomy. By that I mean, like, how do we categorize board games? But what is a board game is kind of the central question that we seek to answer in tonight's episode of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. You are listening to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a weekly podcast dedicated to reviewing board games and discussing topics related to the burgeoning world of tabletop games. Hosts Joe Sallin, Trent Ham, Andrew Dennison, and T.C. Reed examine games both new and old and tackle relevant topics from distinct perspectives. The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly are proudly sponsored by Game Surplus, bringing the world of board games to you at GameSurplus.com. Hello, and welcome to The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, a podcast about board games. I'm the host of The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, Joe Sallin. I'm joined tonight by the two local gamers in this here little like, I don't know, entourage. We'll call it the gaming entourage. Yes.
I am
we're gonna do the movie. Oh, we ain't gonna be able to do the movie. We ain't gonna do the episode. We ain't gonna do the episode. Oh, we're gonna do the episode. That's like the plot of every episode of Entourage of all time. So unfortunately, we don't have the full panel tonight. TC out there doing his family duties, being a good dad. And so anyway, we wish him well. Hopefully the death by meetings strategy that the world is taking on him right now. Hopefully he makes it through there on time.
Do you know how much hell it is to sit through like school meetings as an educator?
You mean from like when you're a parent and you are an educator and you have to sit through the parent thing? That's what you're saying. Like I already kind of had to sit through these before, and now you have to sit through the ones for the kids that you're teaching and the ones for the kid that, for your kid that's those ones. Okay.
The best one was when like I went to my daughter's conference for her science teacher, and the science teacher explained this new technique she knew called science notebooking and wouldn't give me a time to say anything. And then after 10 minutes, I was like, yeah, I've been using that for like 15 years now.
Yeah. Well, you can never tell them that like actually what they're doing right now is the same educational fad that happened like 3 phases ago. And you're still doing it because it was a pretty decent idea. So you're happy to see that it's back. And then that would be the positive spin you could put on it. But nah, it's just none of this stuff is new. Every good idea has already been had. That's what the best teachers
the ones that came from me.
And that's Andrew Dennison here. Horn. And he's not the only one joining me. We've also got Trent. Trent, how are you doing tonight?
Great. Let's do this.
We're gonna do this. We're gonna be reviewing games, and we're also going to be taking a scientific approach to the board gaming hobby. Which Andy, we have you specifically on, so that way you can correct all of my missteps in terms of understanding the actual categorization of living things. Tonight we are talking tabletop taxonomy. It is going to be about categorization of board games. I don't know if Trent was just trying to drop a line that he thought would troll and maybe get a little bit of a rise out of me by saying, I don't think one of your favorite games is actually a game after all. And I heard that and I thought, let's talk about this. And let's not just talk about this. Let's talk about if we're going to make that statement, we got to draw the all the way back, and let's look at this from like this sort of spore rock hurtling through space, or flat disc you're wrong. I'm sorry if you thought that, you're wrong, and you shouldn't have thought that. And you don't listen to feelings, you listen to actual science, and that's about as much as I'm going to get on. Don't listen to Andy. His science is probably not. I don't trust him. But if anybody else agrees with what Andy says, then it could be okay. But if you got your facts from Andy, just keep looking. Make sure you just double reference those. Any comments, Andy? Silence is consent. So Andy seems to also agree with the fact that he that he should not be trusted.
No, I tell that to my students all the time. I'm like, don't trust anybody. Look it up. Double check. They're like, so does that mean we shouldn't trust you? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You should double check everything I tell you.
Actually, that's a comforting thing to hear from a science teacher. Like, if you told me that, like, don't believe what I say, look it up, right? Like, I
could be wrong.
I might not remember things, seriously. Like, and that's I try to make that point whenever I'm giving out like cultural social facts. Like, it's like I'm not a perfect. I'm not a log, right? Like for me, like the writing does not get just written down and then recited word for word. It goes in and then it just it's like putting a notebook in a blender and then expecting to be able to like read the facts afterwards. No, sometimes you'll get some things that rise up that are still conserved, but for the most part, it all just goes back into I like board games, which is what this podcast is all about. We are not alone, though. The three of us are being joined by a wonderful group of chatters that is being headlined by, well, there's just all of them are headliners. They're, to me, you're also special. You're also special. I don't want to pick a favorite one of our community. But we've got, among others, we have joining us for the first time in recent episodes. We have Ray. We've got coming back. We have returning champions, Paul, Murr, Norm, and I'm probably forgetting somebody already, but you know what? Anyway, you know, if you participate in our chat, we got a few people that I want to say that are normally here but are not here. So anyway, we are recording a little bit on an off day. I want to, before we go any further though, say something that I announced for the first time on our last podcast and will continue to be saying here, and that is that we're not only not alone for this episode, we're not alone in the podcasting community. We are part of Cardboard Cohorts. Man, I can't even say it, man. It may sound like core hearts.
I would never say that.
It was Cardboard Cohorts. It's a hard thing to say. It's like, it's tough for me already to get this. I have a tenuous grasp on the English language, and it's already tough. So our Cardboard Cohort is joining us in the chat here. That is Norm. Norm does something that I would love to tell you all about because I've been enjoying it, mowing the grass here, now that the weather's actually decent in the northern Midwest. And that is a couple of little projects he has been releasing episodes for on iTunes. Check them out at Bridge City Board Gamers. I'm, of course, talking about Cardboard Conjecture, Norm's review podcast, in which he and Ryan, both teachers as well, like me and Andy, and the best people in the world. And also Trent's one of the best people in the world. Not a teacher, but just alternative.
Twice a teacher. It's
yes.
Vicarious.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is by association that he's still such a wonderful person. And very humble as well. Very humble. Teachers, very humble folks. The Cardboard Conjecture is where they review games. I thoroughly enjoyed their take on Tobago, which is an interesting game that doesn't get, you know, it's kind of weirdly in and out of print, but it has some really interesting components and a weird, unique way of finding treasure as a group. And they just had such an interesting take on that. They've got other games that they have covered in recent times that have really made me interested in checking them out. Also, check out their, in my opinion, monumental production that is being handled in a very professional way. I think it's interesting both from a board gaming enthusiast as well as an educator, and that is Cardboard in the Classroom. Norm and Ryan both use games as they teach, and it is just fascinating. Norm in his role as a social studies and history teacher, Ryan in his role as a math teacher. So very, very cool stuff handled in an extremely usable, like I want to say they go through in a very methodical, an approach that you can see what was the strategy, what was the goal, the sorts of things that you could actually use those and adopt them for your own class. So the highlights for sale being used to teach mathematical, I believe probability, and I don't remember exactly what the classes were, but for sale, excellent little auction game by Stefan Dora that was used in one of their episodes. So check out their stuff at Bridge City Board Gamers on iTunes. So, and yeah, very, very good stuff. It's one of I've subscribed to them now, and I listen to them when I get a chance to do that. So keep on releasing the great stuff there, Norm. All right. Also, sponsor of The Good, the Brother, and the Ugly is Game Surplus. Check out all their awesome games at discount prices at GameSurplus.com. You'll hear a little advertisement that we've got, a little special that we run here. I did recently update the games that are all collected on Game Surplus, where you can get an extra 10% off. So wait for that ad later in the episode, where you can hear our promo code that you can enter during checkout. So GameSurplus.com, bringing the world of board games to you. And now, our actual episode, starting with reviews. Then we'll talk about the tabletop taxonomy, how we categorize board games. And then finally ending on some hype sections, which I'm really looking forward to. Trent's hype, because I'm going to ask him to hype what I did to troll him by putting it in the documents, and not what he actually wants to hype. So hold on to your seats, and also make sure that nobody ends up doing horrible things to you once you lose your job as a totalitarian dictator in that upcoming hype from Trent. So let's go ahead and kick it off with reviews. And first, let's hear about this isn't really a new review, but just something that I learned for the first time. There's a lot of different interesting features and an LCG that's not dead from what I call the Sage Master, the Zen Master of LCGs, and somebody who I believe collects every single LCG, including LCDs, just because they sound similar. And that's you, Trent.
Okay, Joe kind of wanted me to talk about my recent experiences with Lord of the Rings, the card game. Lord of the Rings, the card game was Fantasy Flight's first cooperative LCG, and obviously it's based on the Tolkien universe. A lot of the expansions for the game kind of play with the Tolkien stories and don't necessarily strictly follow the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But there's also a series of sets of expansions that came out for it that directly follow the story of the Lord of the Rings game or Lord of the Rings books. And there are 6 expansions that each have 3 scenarios each in them. And across those 18 total scenarios, you can basically just play through the Lord of the Rings books. The neat thing about them is that most of the scenarios that have ever been released for Lord of the Rings, the card game, are very independent. You play them by yourself. You build a deck, and then you play against this one scenario, and you're done. With the Lord of the Rings campaign that's 18 linked scenarios, you don't do that. You basically just you're supposed to just play with the same decks all the way through it. It does a couple of unusual things, but the big thing that's really interesting is as you go through each of the scenarios, there's these boon and burden cards that you get based on how you perform in each scenario. And these boon and burden cards pass forward to future scenarios. So you might you do really well in one scenario and earn a boon, and that's a good thing that will carry forward into future scenarios and make them a little easier. If you do badly, you might get a burden, and so on. Some of the scenarios just give you a burden no matter what because it's a bad event that happened, and so on. And so these accumulate, and you start to feel the weight of your earlier decisions and your earlier wins and losses and failures and successes as you go on. And the way this ends up is really cool. So you play all the way through the first 16 of them, okay? And you've got all these boons and burdens that are basically have accumulated over the course of the campaign. And then at the very end, you play the last 2 scenarios. Scenario number 17, you cannot win it. You're going to die. There is no victory condition in the scenario. Okay?
Really? Oh,
yeah.
That actually sounds interesting to me. That's like there was an episode of or one of the missions you had to play in like one of the StarCraft games. There was no way to win. It was like, the whole idea is that you were just trying to survive to be able to conserve your identity, to be able to conserve your race for future civilization. That sounds actually really engaging to me.
Yeah, so you play, and that's the Black Gate opens. That's the one where Aragorn and Gandalf are all fighting at the Gates of Mordor late in the Return of the King movie. I'm referring to the movies. I assume more people have seen the movies than read the books. Mm-hmm. So there's this part near the end where Gandalf and Aragorn and all the Riders of Rohan and all those people are out and fighting in front of the gates. And Sauron is focused on that battle. He's like sending all of his orcs to this battle, and he's focused. What they're actually doing, though, in reality, is they're trying to buy time for Frodo to throw the ring into Mount Doom. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing you can see where this is going. The Black Gate open scenario in the game is you count how many turns you survive. Then, when you go play the Mount Doom scenario, that's how many turns you have to beat it.
Wow, nice. That's how long they actually held them off for.
Yes. It works really well. And the thing is the last 2 scenarios, if you have enough people playing, you can actually play them simultaneously. I've
seen that before in games where it's like, you're sort of wave combat type thing where you're trying to survive and you know that ultimately you're going to be overrun, like Call of Duty Zombies, but I've never seen it apply to something that's directly impacted by how long you've lasted in one of those scenarios to give you that many turns to succeed. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it works really well. It's really interesting. The thing is, what I found is when you play the Black Gate opens, that's the one where you see how long you can survive, you almost immediately want to go play Mount Doom. Like, you just want to, it doesn't matter whether you have time for it, you want to get out Mount Doom and see whether or not all your effort has paid off. Mm-hmm. And then the thing is, I find Black Gate opens really replayable because you keep on wanting to set a new high score. Like, can I survive for 8 rounds? Can I survive for 9 rounds? Can I do it for 10? Mm-hmm. And see, because the more rounds you survive, obviously, the easier the last scenario Mount Doom gets.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna spoil a little bit. It's hilarious. This is one of my favorite things they ever did. So at the end of the very last scenario, the Mount Doom one, Frodo's got the ring and he's able to, or it's about to be thrown into the Mount Doom. And you turn over the last scenario card and you read the back of it, and the first player reads it. The first player has the option to keep the ring, and everybody loses the entire campaign.
Basically, the first player gets to be Gollum.
Yes, I loved it. That was fantastic.
Oh, I would so do that.
So that was a spoiler for you. I I first of all, I apologize that it was a spoiler. Secondly, what were you doing these last years when you haven't been paying any attention to Lord of the Rings that you just knew that?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
I just say it's highly worth playing through this campaign. It's really.
Well, Trent, would you say that it's with what they're doing in the non-campaign stuff, like the sort of like creative scenarios that they're coming out with? When I say creative, I mean like non-canon, so not actually set along with the book.
Yeah, the series of Lord of the Rings actual storyline expansions.
Yes, that's the main thing that you've been commenting on. So with the other ones, would you say that like have they been sort of continuing to innovate? I know that you said that that there are some new sort of like a new resource that can kill you. Like I'm thinking like Forbidden Desert.
Yeah, well, and the next to most recent cycle, there was a lot of stuff that involved ships, and you actually had like a compass mechanism where you chose your direction. It was very interesting. It was like your ship. It depends on the scenario. That was interesting. And if the temperature ever died, and basically like you would have to do you have to go out in the desert for a while to do something, and the temperature gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and you have to really seek out an oasis or else bail, to get the temperature back down a little bit. And if the temperature ever got to 60, you just die in this scenario. So it's like another resource to keep track of.
So, but you could actually return then to reset this temperature dial.
Yeah, but you can like
risk reward sort of thing.
Yeah, and the ones that do it, you have like options where you can go back to the stage of the quest and like drop the temperature by like 5 or whatever.
Okay, but you have to then repeat elements of the challenge to take as like that's what you're dropping the temperature by 5, but now you kind of have to go back over that element of what you've already completed. Well, that's really cool, and thanks for sharing that, Trent. So that was kind of an update on Lord of the Rings, the card game, and really it just sounds so engaging to me. I really want to get this going. I
play it at lunch.
Yeah, that seems and you actually play this solo as well as playing with others, right?
Yes, I like playing it solo with 2 decks quite a bit.
Okay. But then on top of that, you do play occasionally with your family, but does that generally tend to be like you play kind of scenarios that are going to be specific things for them? Or
yeah, we play ones that we know we're going to curb stomp. They don't like ones where you get overwhelmed. So I played it with them, but it's ones that I know we're just going to crush.
Okay, so like you kind of play it solo for your first game all the time, and then you try the ones that you understand well and have a good grasp on. You then try those with your family. Okay.
I 2 of my kids are willing to play it, and one of them will play like a deck that just kills enemies, and one of them will play a deck that just quests, and then I'll play a deck that just heals them. Mm-hmm. I play support.
Yeah, it's letting them take point. That's of course. Yep. That's like being a dad, basically.
Yep, that's what we do.
You're rolling the fish. You roll in the fish. Or reel in the fish. Jeez, what's wrong with me? Roll in the fish. What is... Anyway, yeah, I apologize to every fisherman out there. I don't know why. I'm just rolling in fish here as I transition into... into this moment of Andy rolling in the fish in his Andy, go.
So I'm gonna talk about the game Reef Encounters. So we're going with an out of print one again, but
you can find it online.
Playing it online actually with Mur. We've had like constant games going. I don't even know how long now. I'm probably around 10 plays of this. I've won like once, but it's really neat because it's basically kind of a tile laying game where you collect these tiles, you put them on the board and whatnot. The thing that makes it really interesting, though, is there's these other tiles that tell you how they are related to each other. So, like, one tile will say orange is stronger than pink. Another tile will be gray is, gray is over white or whatnot. And what those tell you is how much like end game value they have. Also, you can do things to steal tiles from other players by playing a higher color tile than them. You might want to do that so that you can get a hold of other things that will let you lock in certain values and whatnot. So basically, the game is kind of a vicious tile laying game crossed with like a currency trading game. So it came out before 4X, but it kind of reminded me a lot of 4X, at least in terms of the way of which colors, better or whatever. But I'm enjoying the heck out of it because it is like, it's mean. Like you can have your little, shrimp, you get this shrimp and you can put him on tiles and he'll protect all the ones that are around him, or at least orthogonally around him. But the problem is you really want to have more tiles than that out, because when you eat the shrimp, and you can only eat so many shrimp in the game, you have to throw out the first 4 of a color. So, for example, if you have 6 orange coral pieces and you eat that shrimp, you get 2 of them. The other 4 are thrown out. So you can only ever safely protect, depending on the arrangement you set up, the most you can guarantee yourself is 1 tile, because you can protect the center one and the 4 around it. And then it gets packed in fast. So you could be like, I'm making this wonderful pink area. I'm going to get so many points. And then someone's like, oh, dude, like I can eat those pink tiles and I need that to get the polyps. And yeah, I'm going to place right here. Oh, I just took 3 of your pink tiles. Oh, that sucks for you, doesn't it? So yeah, it's very vicious. It's basically like currency trading on a coral reef. It is how I think of the game. Really enjoying it. Of course, it's vicious, so I enjoy it. But yeah, no, Merv's been curb stomping me at it. But yeah, I'm getting better. Like I'm learning little tricks as I go. Like, oh, if I do this, and here, then it's not advantageous to go for me. And then all of that. The other thing, the thing I think that's going to get you curb stomped more than anything else, though, is if another person is getting their tiles laid down and eating shrimp faster than you are, if you can't you're just done. Like if you can't eat all your shrimp and somebody else did, unless you've got a really high value tile, you are out of it.
You basically so what you're kind of trying to do is if somebody leaves himself open to like you being able to just make it impossible for them to eat shrimp and have it matter.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, because the other thing you can do is these tiles that you can flip for the currency exchange. If you have tiles that you've stolen by laying more powerful tiles on top of them, not eaten but stolen, you can turn in that tile to flip one of those things, making one color more valuable than another. Or once you've eaten one shrimp, you can play these little cylinders, which I think they call algae or something. But you play a cylinder and you lock the tile so it can no longer be flipped. So once you kind of get invested in a color, you can start locking that color down so nobody can just flip it back again. So, yeah, it's pretty vicious.
Would the curb stomping be any nicer if, like Mer suggested, you make nom 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 sounds as you eat the tiles?
I do that anyway. It's like making vroom vroom sounds when you play a racing game. You just kind of got to do it.
The fact, like the idea of eating coral, just sounds like something that would be really therapeutic if they put it in like a video game where like you're like here you are, you're a fish that just eats coral. Just
well, no, and you look at this game, you're like Reef Encounter. Look at all the pretty fish and little shrimp, and watch it as it punches you in the balls repeatedly.
It's like, oh, dang. Well,
it looks cute, but oh god, it's mean. It is really mean.
All right. Well, Trent, I know that you have played Reef Encounter. I think you own this one, don't you?
Yes, I really, really enjoy it. It's like it was in my last batch of about 25, and I was making my top 10 all-time list.
So pretty high up there for you.
Yeah, right. But it basically is a currency trading game.
That's what it is. It has more in common with 4X than you'd think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sounds really interesting. I mean, for me, this is one of those like huge gaming disaster games for me. Like I rated this game at one time, and then I've rescinded my rating completely. Like I tried to play this one in the very wrong environment. First of all, I tried to play. Are you playing this 2-player, Andy?
A lot of our games have been 2-player. We've done a few with more.
Do you think it works fine?
Oh yeah, it becomes very zero sum then, but it's fine because then it becomes like a chess match because it's like, oh god, he's doing okay. I shouldn't be getting orange as well. I got a dumpster fire orange somehow. It becomes more like tactical. Like they did this, now I have to respond this way.
Exactly. If you're playing it with more than two, like it's like 4X with more than two. The things you do might actually benefit another player as well, and you have to take that into mind. Mm-hmm. On the 1-on-1, like it's just like it's your moves are going to benefit you more than the other guy, or you're not doing them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any of that thinking about how the currency market is affecting the third guy.
So it's kind of like one of those games where a 2-player game becomes a little bit black and white, and you end up playing with a different element of the game a lot more than the gray area that it sounds like the currency exchange that you've described. Even though the currency we're talking about here is coral, like it's living organisms.
Well, yeah, because you're not winning it too if you're doing the same thing. Like if you're both invested in white, if you have the same number of white, you're summing up to 0. So you're better off doing something to trash white and get a different color.
Nice. Yeah, well, it sounds really interesting. I'd love to give this one a go. I mean, I made a mistake of trying to play this one 2-player with my wife who, she thought it was a really pretty looking game. And yeah, that's not
there would be a lot of opacity here for Caroline.
Yeah.
And not to mention, she doesn't really prefer the games where you're insanely mean to each other.
No. It's just, across the board, aside from the artwork, there's nothing about this game that you would find appealing. And it was, unfortunately, that was my only experience with the game.
Be like, oh, look, Caroline. Oh, that's some wonderful coral. I'm going to take that one and that one and that one.
Nom, 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 nom.
I'm being very serious with you, Joe. Probably of the games I know that you've played, I think that the one that is probably closest to this is 4X.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
That sounds really awesome to me. Like I do really enjoy 4X. I've enjoyed every game that we played of it. I want to keep playing that. I want to play Reef Encounter. So make it happen. Come on.
Jumping online, man. I've been playing online constantly.
Yeah, well, I should be able to play online here real soon because we got like a week from tomorrow, and then that's it. That's school's out.
I would join you, but I have no faith whatsoever in me being able to take consistent or timely turns.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, speaking of which,
yeah,
you need to set up another game.
Yeah, Andy just uses this to make a little announcement there. So while Mur's out there setting up the game, while he's opening his tab, we will smoothly move into my review game for the day, which is, I don't know, I want to call it a review. I'll adopt what Andy's been calling his games recently. Some of his reviews when I've only played a game once, so I just want to call this like a first impressions. And I'm going to be talking about the recent release from Capstone Games, Wildcatters. It is a game about drilling oil, and basically what you're going to be doing in this game is trying to sell your barrels of oil to refineries in specific territories that will give you pieces in an area control game for each territory. So there's like 7 different areas in the game, I think. 7 different areas that there can be refineries, and you'll be essentially building oil derricks, then developing these oil derricks to get oil, and then sending this oil using a transportation system that you've built to refineries that the players actually build. So you start the game with a certain amount of equal resources for every player that your choice is essentially where you're going to place it. And there's kind of a setup that I kind of do like the way that the setup is done. You deal out the deck of cards that is used throughout the playing of the game, which each has different territories that you can act in. And basically, you have to place one of your 7 pieces to start the game in a territory for each card that you play. And you're dealt like 8 cards, and you only actually ever have to play, I think, 6 of them. So I guess there's only 6 pieces. But anyway, you end up with a setup that's sort of randomized to a certain extent, but you do have control over the setup. It's definitely an integral part of the game. And then from that point forward, you're going to be taking actions based on drafting from that same deck, where each card has a territory, one of 8 territories. They're divided into 4 major regions in the game. And each of those 4 regions is an area for area majority, where there's going to be points at the end of the game. Whoever has the most oil barrels that were shipped from that area is going to get 16, and then 8, and then 4 points. So first, second, and third. That right there. The amount of points that are given in this game specifically for oil barrel majorities is going to represent the bulk of the scoring in this game. Out of our 4-player game, the total points scored was probably in the realm of about 360, 370 points. And of those points, over 200 of them came specifically from the area majorities. And these are the types of area majorities where, I have one more than you, I'm scoring 16 points, and you're now scoring just 8 points. So it's that type of, you can't really know where people are going to go with their stuff until it's very, very late in the game. You are essentially limited in this game to where you can take actions by what you draft out of a card line. And what's interesting about this card line is that the cards also have benefits on them. And you're going to be managing workers, which from what I understand were originally money. But now they've been changed to workers in this new game. I don't think it's really that big of a deal. But yeah, it's weird because you've got your workers are represented by cards. So you're paying cards that say 1 worker on them. It's kind of an interesting, weird thing.
I think of the workers as just practically money.
It is money, yeah. They're not. They're barely workers. They're not really workers. I mean, I feel like if you made them cubes, it'd be okay, that's workers. But even then, it's you're spending money to do stuff.
Well, you've got discs.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, the discs are already oil, so, and I guess there's little tokens to represent multiple workers, which I think are a little bit actually easier to pay and easier to handle than the actual cards themselves. Yeah. But so you've got that currency that you're going to be using to spend, and you have to take all of your actions in the region of the card that you draft. You're also allowed, though, there's 3 different neutral territories, and you can choose one of those 3 neutral territories and essentially take a full turn there as much as you'd like to do. Your turn includes building oil derricks, starting the development in an area, which is a very expensive initial investment, and other players can then that are already there can piggyback off of you. And then the other action you can take is transporting, and so firing up the transport in an area also costs you workers, and other players just get to inherently benefit from that. You're then going to be using transportation networks that are represented by little trains that are between connections in places. And this is one of those times when the game, you own the transportation network, and so for other players to use that, they have to pay you. And this is where the other currency in the game comes into play, which is called shares. And really, they call it shares, but it's kind of like your own personal money. Your own personal money, you've got about 50 or so cards that represent shares in your company, and you will be paying and then getting paid in these shares. So you're going to be getting workers every round as an income, and then you'll be getting shares in your own company should you choose to take that in at certain intervals in the game when your refinery gets used. And so the refinery is a really big part of this game because all oil in this game that's getting shipped needs to go to a refinery. And owning and operating a refinery is dangerous because every time somebody delivers to your refinery, you're forced to buy it from them, and you're forced to pay your own shares. If you ever don't have shares to buy or to pay somebody and they deliver oil to your refinery, you're forced to take a loan. And loans in this game can be really tough. You initially get 10 shares as a loan, and then you have to pay back 18. Or if you wait too late in the game to do this, or it happens later in the game, you have to pay back 25. Now, shares at the end of the game are not worth all that much, so it's not that big of a deal as long as you can just make sure that you're solvent by the end of the game, because that otherwise could be just totally condemning. There's nothing you can do about it if you can't pay them back. But anyway, whenever your refinery gets delivered to you, have to pay shares, but that's kind of more of an investment. As soon as your refinery gets filled up, you get paid, and you're allowed to take double the amount of shares that you had to pay for. So it's kind of like you're making a 100% return on your investment immediately, and this is the main way that you're going to be getting income in the game. All players start with a refinery on the board, and all players have to choose one of the 4 different starting regions, and once a region's been chosen, you can't choose it. that would just be too, like, it would just basically take those two players out of the game. If one of them, if they both went to the same spot, it would be, I can see why that you're not allowed to do that. So anyway, what you're doing in this game is you're shipping oil. You're taking oil that you've drilled, and then you're shipping it to try to put your barrels in a spot for area control at the end of the game. And ultimately, that's really all that I feel comfortable saying. So now I'm going to give an opinion that's really shaky. And here's what I'm going to say. If you liked Terra Mystica over Gaia Project, I think you'll really like Wildcatters. And that's to people who have played quite a bit of Gaia Project and know that Terra Mystica is for them. And that's because, like, in Terra Mystica, the way that the cult track worked was that, like, whoever's the highest on it made 8 points. Second highest is 4. And it doesn't really matter. It's like a closed economy where you can end up spending all the workers you want, all the resources you want to try to get higher. If somebody else jumps ahead of you, then you're now getting less than you would have. So it's like you don't really know how much you're going to be making, and it ends up being where there's a lot of, like, sort of closed economy decisions where you felt like you were going to win something, and now you're not because a player chose to go into your area. And so it feels like a lot of what you're doing sort of is like cutting everybody else down to a level. And if you really like doing that, that's just like there's 7 regions where you can just cut each other down because there's this closed economy of points. There is some ways to get points in the base game, but it's kind of minor. I mean, it's these. I don't want to say minor. The Wildcatter tokens can be really beneficial, so it can be worth quite a few of your points. But it still isn't going to be. It's at most going to be about half of the points that you make in relation to how many points you get from the actual area majorities. You can win auctions for Wildcatters, which the tough thing about that is that you're having to pay your shares, and you can end up without any shares. And now you've got to take a loan, which sucks. So ultimately, though, if your thing is to be specifically like cutting down other players to try to get the most points in an area with a pretty simple, like, I have the most, I get the most points. Oh, now I have the most, I get those points, and you get less. Like that sort of like, who do I cut down? Who needs to be cut down? And who am I in a position to cut down is really like what my decisions are all like at the end of the game. Because I'm looking around, I'm like, who do I think is going to win this game? Who do I think is going to get the most points in the end game? And also, who can I set up to get the most points, or who has set me up to get the most points for myself? And, like, that's ultimately, like, your last round is just going to be like, okay, how's this going to all shake out? Then if you really like that, this game is for you. I would say, personally, I'm looking for a little bit more, like, I want to be able to take actions where it's not just like, okay, who do I cut down? It's not just like me sort of like trying to balance the game and come out on top. I guess I saw the conversion of the cult track from Terra Mystica to Gaia Project being a positive thing, because now, like, you just get 4 points if you get this high. You get 8 points if you get this high. You get 12 points if you get to the top, and only one person gets to the top. So there is a little bit of benefit to being at the top of a track that only one person can benefit from. But here, it's like in Wildcatters, it's like, okay, guys, here's most of the points in the game. Go fight over them. So, and I don't think that that's quite as engaging to me, though I do enjoy the development. I love how the board builds up to this point where it's like, okay, where am I going to activate that's going to be worth the most points? What am I going to, you get this feeling like as the game goes on of like you built this sort of infrastructure and mind, actually got this product. So the way that you're drafting cards that have to take actions in an area, I think it's interesting that every card has its own benefit on it, but it really can be, I don't say difficult. If you can't get a card for the area that you have plans to take an action in, it can feel like this really unnecessary limitation the game has produced on you, has just put on top of you, where it's like, okay, well, I'm really screwed. And the game does have a way for you to flush the line and get more cards out. But even when one of the players in our game did that, he didn't get a card that he needed, and he still had to take like a suboptimal action. And then you only get to take 7 actions in this entire game. So it was really condemning. Truly condemning, truly like a difficult thing to, like, oh, there's one of your 7 actions that just sucks. So for this to be like
that's the danger of being too heavily specialized in one region.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think, Andy, you probably have a bit of a different perspective on this, and you probably as well, Trent. Andy, playing this game took a bit of a different approach. I have a few more like theories on it, but I really want to play it again to see whether or not those theories have any validity to them. But does anything that I've said so far make sense, Andy? Does anything like the sort of fighting for this closed economy of points, does that sound to you like you're going to need to enjoy that, and that's because that's basically what this game is about. Would you agree?
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, like that aspect doesn't feel very different to me from most area control games, so which is kind of where the main points from this game come out, so that kind of makes sense. The thing I think about this game right now is it's one of those ones that once you kind of teach the rules, like it makes sense how everything's going to move around, but I got a long way to go before I think I have any particular strategy that's going to work better than another one. I was discussing this with some people. Like, I think I've only played a couple games, but I think people were drilling for oil too soon. Like, we just wanted to get a region out and start shipping stuff. And I don't know if that's what you necessarily want to do. I was thinking about it later and wondering if you could set up a situation where you never have to be the one drilling for oil. Like, just, making sure you have rigs all over the place. And that way you can always piggyback off of somebody doing something. Might be another possible avenue of attack for the game, because it's 8 workers to, develop that region, which then once you've done, everybody else just has an easier time of it. So I don't know. There's a lot of things I want to try before I feel like I have a good handle on it. But I think, it's not as much of an economic game as it is an area control game. So if area control is not your thing, then...
Yeah, well, I mean, it is an area control game, but it's a pretty basic, straightforward area control game. Like, there's not much to the area control aspect of this game.
No, that's just where you're going to get your points. It's how do you get the stuff there to take advantage. It's not as simple as just putting cubes down. You have to figure out how you're going to get your dang barrels over there.
You are kind of, but I didn't mention in my description that, like, you can ship via the water with like oil tankers. Mm-hmm. And these allow you to basically deliver to wherever. So really, like, getting your barrels to other places can be quite easy and very lucrative if you've got a tanker. Like, to me, I was most engaged and interested when I didn't have to use tankers and actually had to rely on the rail system, because I thought the rail system was the most, like, to me, that was the most fun thing about, like, the area control, because it's like, okay, well, how am I going to get this here? Okay, well, if I paid Andy 1 share, I could go use this rail, and then I've got my own rail that I can use to get it to over here. So to me, the rail system was more engaging, because if you use oil tankers, literally the rule for oil tankers is just sail from one port to any other port. Everything is
limited to what can put on it, though. I don't know. The thing... I don't know. Even in that game we played, which was a learning game for pretty much all of us in it, like, I really think we didn't piggyback as much as we could have. And I think that might be where it's one of those ones, like, we were all equally skilled within the game, which means we all sucked. But if you were playing someone who was really good, it would be interesting to watch and see what they do. Because I think there's more avenues of attack in this game to accomplish your goals than what I've done in my last 2 games. So I want to experiment with that a little bit. The only other thing I think we've done is really overvalued the Wildcatter tokens. Because they can give you a lot of points in the end, but if you're blowing a butt ton of shares to get it, then, I don't know. It feels like if you get a Wildcatter really early, you're like, hey, I got all these points. And then someone's like, I'm going to be delivering to your refinery because then you're going to take a loan. There was someone I was talking to on Twitter, I think, that his group's like, somewhere between 5 and 10 plays. And they said now their mentality has been switching to how do I help myself from how do I screw over that person in a way that also does something I want? And they've been, like, just basically gut punching each other at Wildcatters.
Yeah, what I've observed, though, I played it like 4 or 5 times now. What I've observed is if I notice someone is low on their own color of shares, my goal is usually to make them spend more shares.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because that ends up being really bad really quick.
Yeah, loans are not something you want to take. I mean, it's a dangerous game to play the loan game. But I do think, though, that because of the way the Wildcatters work, you do want to try to spread them out. At least not let one player get all of them.
That's a butt ton of points. But if you're shutting out
I think
if you're paying like 10 shares at the beginning of the game for one, that's not going to be a good idea either.
No, you're ruined at that point. There's really not much you can do. So, yeah, you almost always want to keep like a safe amount of at least 10 shares on hand, because that way if somebody just totally fills up a refinery for you, you're going to get, your money back. You at least want to have as many shares in your own possession as you have open spots in refineries times 2. So, but I really do think that there's more avenues to explore. I do believe, though, that you have to accept that there's a very fairly basic area control game that's really going to be how you net points in this game. And that's like, there's not really much that it does to make it special as an area control game, though that is how you make the most points. To me, the most engaging part of this game is how you're sort of like first acquiring the resources and then moving them about. That's to me what's engaging. Like I enjoy those elements of the game. But that's really not what the game is going to reward you for. It's going to reward you for sort of stabby who has the most points. That's where I'm going to send my stuff. And the game makes it fairly easy to send your stuff wherever you need to. So, to get the most points. So yeah, I mean, the way that you're going to get there is going to be what's really makes this game different. And I do enjoy that and find it engaging and interesting, but it's always going to end up with that last round being like, okay, who left the most doors open for me to just slap them down a bit and then get the most points. So, and that's just what you kind of got to know going into it. And I may make it sound like that's bad, but that's exactly what a lot of people are looking for. So, fascinating game about producing oil where you score points for area control. And that's Wildcatters. Which Wildcatters, by the way, is about oil. Yeah, it's about making oil. Sorry, no wildcats involved. No bobcats. No little kittens that you can find on the side of the road in Texas and then be like, ooh, that's a pretty painful bite from a kitten. Take it to the vet and find out they were actually baby bobcats. So I thought this is a news article I saw recently. But yeah, unfortunately not those wildcats. These are, a different expression. So that is our review section. And we are now going to talk, oh my goodness, we are now going to get the most basic and limited and self-deprecating transition of all time into Good Board Ugly is a proud member of Punchboard Media. Find awesome content like Paul Grogan's Gaming Rules, Katie's Game Corner, The Cubist, and much more at punchboardmedia.com. The scientific classification of board games, also known as taxonomy. And what would so if we're going to call this kingdom, would you guys be, because we are now moving into our topic where we're talking about how to classify board games. We're going to start here. Let's draw it all the way back. Would you guys be okay with calling our kingdom tabletop? Or not tabletop, I'm sorry. Tabletop is, our kingdom would be just called gaming.
I don't know what you mean.
Here's what I want to say. I want to say the kingdom is
Are
gaming.
you talking about the order of classification?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense.
That taxonomy. What are the taxonomy?
Okay, I got you. I don't know. I didn't know what you meant at first. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Like kingdom, phylum, what is the... So what I want to say is kingdom would be gaming, and then underneath that, I could see there being like video game as one classification, and then tabletop game,
I'd say electronic or non-electronic. Yeah, digital or analog.
Digital and analog gaming. Are we okay with this so far? I mean, I feel like we're not getting controversial just yet.
Okay, where's XCOM the board game?
Well, we've already got... okay.
And everything goes downhill.
Yeah. There's a lot of crossover even between that. But it still fits under the same kingdom, right? And I mean, is there... Between like our kingdoms here, like there's mammalia, right? And like plants. Is there any crossover between any of those kingdoms? Between like the fungus.
Yeah,
kingdom.
That's why they made the protist kingdom.
Where they put everything that doesn't fit.
Yeah. It's like, oh, we got this little thing. Oh, it's green. It must be a plant. Oh, it's dark out. Why is it eating things?
Well, that's XCOM the board game, the Protist category. It's Proteus, that crappy 80s horror movie. Proteus, 80s horror sci-fi. So we've got digital and analog, and we're already, I guess, running into that. So the only thing we could agree on is gaming, and now we've already got controversy. But yeah, continuing down, underneath, we're not going to explore the video gaming side. We will leave that, the digital gaming side. Maybe leave that for talking specifically about digital games. So analog gaming, the focus of this podcast, a podcast about board games. And then where would you guys see as being the phylums, right, would be next? So I'm just going to throw these out there, and you guys tell me whether or not you agree that our phylums would be like thematic and strategic. This is going off of Board Game Geek. Are we at all okay with this?
Yeah, it's off of
I don't know. I'm not sure, actually. I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
I want to underneath thematic. Okay. So, all right. How are we going to differentiate? Because what we need to say is like, okay, we play board games, but then an element of tabletop is like RPG role-playing games.
Yeah.
So what is the distinguishing? Where is the line drawn where we could file things into, and this is our OCD episode, I guess, because we're trying to categorize things. And just so you know, the world is great. Our hobby is great to mimic that. And this is not going to be scientific by any means. It's going to be a lot of theories and not a lot of proof. So, Andy, you're already done. He's already done.
No, you don't. No, it's my science teacher pet peeve because you used theory when you should have used hypothesis.
Andy just corrected my semantics. We've entered a new age.
Well, you went into an area of language and semantics I actually know.
A lot of hypotheses, and because we haven't developed them enough to make them into theories, because that's
it
the
doesn't
difference
explain
between
why it works. That's
Okay.
the point.
I'm gonna just jump in here and give you what I think my definition of a board game is. Okay,
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
A board game is a game with physical components that has a limited number of choices per turn and has an end condition. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, generally overall. Yeah, because I would distinguish board games from, say, RPG games where they don't have.
RPGs don't have an end condition. And they generally, some of like the one-off scenario ones do, but I actually feel like those are kind of close to board games anyway, closer than like Pathfinder or something.
Yeah.
And then there's also in RPGs you can do whatever you want, whereas in board games you're limit. You have some limit on your choices that you can make because of the game itself. So player choice is limited in board games and unlimited in RPGs. Board games have an end condition, and generally RPGs don't, although it's not 100% true.
So to be more basic here, underneath analog gaming, we could say board games and then RPGs. Is that and we define them as such?
I would think so, and I think in general card games fall into the board game group.
Okay.
That's true. I was thinking about that earlier. Because it's kind of a weird definition, because I know even Game Surplus, they break their search engine down between card games and board games. And that one always initially throws me. I'm like, aren't those the same thing?
Well, yes, Game Surplus is the beacon and the encyclopedia by which the entire hobby is dictated, and that's our sponsor as well.
Well, not so much that, but I'm just like, that little juxtaposition always kind of throws me for a minute.
It does for me too, because I'm like, I don't want to just get card games, and I also don't want to exclude card games. So I see exactly where you're coming from.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking about.
But under Trent's definition of what exactly a board game is, the fact that it has finite choices and player condition, I mean, we're still, the word board implies something that's not present in that description, Trent. So
yeah, I mean, Dominion, is that not I guess you could say it's a card game, but
And we're talking more about a pragmatic definition here, and not like just a perfect exact what would we call it, the difference between those, because I'm thinking, we're talking about how does the word board game get used, and you, Trent, are most accurately trying to represent the way that it gets used in words, and not just within the hobby. I would say like kind of an inside the hobby definition. Whereas outside the hobby, anybody who's never heard of games within our hobby, a board game is just any game that has a physical board. And then you start talking like, well, hey, hold on, let's play this game called Dominion. It certainly feels like it belongs in the category of other games that I would play.
Is PAX Renaissance a board game?
Well, it uses cards to represent a board.
Yeah, I mean, it gets really vague when you start worrying into there's a difference. The way I see it is that card games are a subset of board games.
Yeah.
Well, and just board game by itself is such a really poor word just to use as the nomenclature for the entire hobby. It's I think it's based on perceptions of sort of mass market tabletop games from the first few, like I want to say like the 50s and 60s. Probably even it goes back even.
I was thinking Avalon Hill, but that's probably earlier even than that.
Mm-hmm. Like when most people hear, do you want to play a board game? They think of like a game that's going to be in a box that's probably got a bunch of damage to it and looks like garbage and has a picture from like 60 years ago of like two, like a small suburban family, holding a piece and acting like super excited, just really cheeseball. Like I feel like that's where the word board game,
that totally comes from that. I think the term I've heard some people use, and the one I kind of try to use, but I don't always get it, is hobby game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like.
There's a definite distinction in my mind between hobby board games and mass market board games. Those have not. I don't know. I feel like those branch into very different categories, expectations, and who they're trying to reach.
Yeah.
Than other things.
Mm-hmm. Hobby board games, modern board games.
Well, no, because you can still have modern mass market board games.
Yeah.
But
I understand that. Like that definition right there is already elitist and already is inaccurate in a way, and sort of doing what I think inside of a lot of hobbies. I think just tabletop it has a monopoly on on co-opting words.
Nice slip of the word monopoly in there.
Monopoly.
Yeah, which clearly Monopoly, if played correctly, though, is it a hobby board game? Andy, is Monopoly Tropical Tycoon or whatever, the one that you have, is it a hobby board game?
And that's where I'd say, like, there's to me, when they split, it's very much about audience. So, like, if you take your standard Monopoly game, that's meant to be reaching like the most numbers of peoples, like people that they want to read like 2 paragraphs of rules and they're off to the races or something like that. They're after a much broader audience. Whereas if you're making something in the hobby market, they start layering some complexity on it, because these are people that generally want a little more challenge. They're going to have the patience to maybe sit down and read a slightly bigger rule book at the very least, and things like that. Like if you're looking at Monopoly Tropical Tycoon, what that looks like, or what that kind of feels like, is taking Monopoly and then adding in some elements from hobby board game, trying to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. It kind of feels like it's like, how much little extra complexity can I sneak in and move people towards this sort of hobby board game world? Or maybe an attempt to fix what, some people consider to be a flawed game, using elements of hobby board gaming that are much more modern and worked through, and things like that. Like I would still put Monopoly Tropical Tycoon squarely within the mass market audience. but it's got a few elements from the other side.
And like hobby games, almost, like, because one of the aspects of being a hobby gamer, I think, is to find, even in like the mass market games, which ones will be, like for example, like Lupin Louis has this huge, very positive reputation, even though it's, and it's basically a game that it's sold to kids and sold in like Toys R Us. RIP, by the way, RIP, never forget, Toys R Us. And don't donate to that GoFundMe that they're having right now. Don't waste your money. Anyway,
seriously, they have a GoFundMe?
Oh, it's pretty bad too.
Oh.
It's like the actual legality of who's running it and what's going on is kind of questionable. So
that sounds
anyway,
like my wife's cousins who had an apartment shower.
Nice.
Gift grab.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Give me stuff for my ordinary life event, please.
Yeah, like they were putting down like high grade dishes and stuff. It's like, what's your first apartment? You get the crap your parents are throwing out. That's what you get.
Here's a $10 gift card to Goodwill. Stock up.
Yeah, exactly.
Copy of Monopoly.
Copy of Monopoly.
Yeah, the copy of Monopoly you don't need anymore now that you're into better hobby games. But
I think, kind of talking about Lupin Louis though, the one category of game that can kind of flick back and forth between the two and do okay is dexterity games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those have a lot of people in the hobby world that like them. Those have a lot of mass market ones that like them as well. And they kind of go nicely back and forth between the two. Lupin Louis or Chewy does that. There's another one.
I feel like, Andy, here's what I'd like to make a distinction. I think that in Europe, specifically in Germany, that the mass market is more along the lines of like a hobby game market than the mass market is in the U.S., which the mass market in the U.S. tends to be, like games that people have heard of before, where you're like, you're there with family and you're like, hey, does anybody have this game? And so you go to the store and you're specifically looking for this game. And so every big box store is going to have a copy of like Risk, a copy of Monopoly, a copy of, like Sorry, a copy of a whole bunch of, games that do not hold up as adults, but ones that you play at a family gathering and you play them specifically by name. And usually there's an element of nostalgia involved in them. I would say that in Germany, the idea of like, going to the mass market game section of a department store is going to be vastly different than what it would be like in the U.S. People are not going to be in that section expecting to see something. It's more akin to going to a bookstore. You don't go to a bookstore looking for the specific book all the time. You're going to expect them to have a selection of books you've never heard of. Whereas when people that are not familiar with board games walk into a board game store, they're like, oh my God, I've never heard of any of these. And most people like get very overwhelmed by that and feel like I'm going to go stay on this side of the store, which at our local game store, it happens to be like, it's a comic store that also sells like magic cards, and so like people don't really venture into the board game section except for to occasionally gawk and be like, I've never heard of any of these games. What are these? So, like in Germany, though, I think that it's more like here's a varied selection of games. They have like an award that's given to specifically identify to people like, hey, this is a game that you're going to be able to learn really quickly. And maybe just quickly to mention, it was a really interesting debate, or I won't say debate, but like an interesting article that was published by the people who put out the award in Germany called the Spiel des Jahres, which is the biggest award in board games, I would say. I think it's pretty safe to say that the game that gets the Spiel des Jahres award is going to sell the most copies of any other game in analog, tabletop gaming. And the way that they decide on that is like, it has to be accessible. It has to be accessible to people that are not hobby gamers. It has to be like your sort of mass market level where people can just pick up the game, learn it really quickly. And they said one of the biggest things that excludes the game from consideration by the Spiel des Jahres jury is that its rule book is not – it does not do a good job of teaching the game. It needs to be still developed a little bit. Like great games, they said, they cannot consider because they have to make this award so that when people see it, they see that little thing and it's like, this is a game that I can play with no prior knowledge of the hobby, with very minimal effort on my part. So, that's like your mass market game is by somebody who knows nothing about it, picks up this game, knows nothing about the hobby, and can just
go with it, right? And in the US, I would say that a game like Risk is the only reason Risk is like that, because Risk's rules are not easy like that. They're not. The only reason that these games are the way that they are is because they get passed down, and they get passed down, and it's like playing a game of Password when you look at Monopoly throughout the years. It's just changed so much because nobody actually reads the rules. They just play the same rule set that they've always played, that they were taught when they were kids.
Yeah, the $500 or whatever on free parking.
And that you don't auction. You don't actually ever hold an auction, because auctions are a tough thing to do in a game. It's tough to gauge and understand money. I mean, there's so many elements of a game, of the game of Monopoly, that are not learned correctly by people. And, where is this really a distinction that we should make? I mean, are we being American, United States centric when we say, that we even make a distinction between mass market tabletop, mass market, and hobby, because I totally see what you mean. Andy, I understand that communication works for me, but would it work for somebody who's used to the production and selection of games that are being produced in Germany?
No, I mean, it's definitely some social norms on that kind of end. But I mean, the mass market, for one, is different than another. So yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just what we think of as mass market. I mean, when I see the publishers and stuff use the term, they're basically talking about what's the vast majority of games you see in Walmart and Target or something.
Yeah, and I think it can be based on that. And I do think, even that started to change with Ticket to Ride being made available. Specifically, Target is really upping their selection to be more akin to what it's like in Europe. But
and that's, I think, the point of your. I mean, honestly, if you're thinking about it, the point of your quote unquote another way to classify games by sort of complexity, because then you've got gateway, light, medium, heavy, so on. I mean, if you're making a gateway game, I mean, ultimately, yeah, you're kind of like bridging someone into the hobby. But at the same time, I would have to think, if you're making a gateway game, you're sitting there like, make it to mass market so I can sell lots and lots of copies. If you're a board game designer, who doesn't want to be Alan R. Moon at that point?
Or even Vlad, now that Codenames is out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because, if you got an evergreen that's going to be in the mass market, that's going to be, just nice capital for your company that's going to allow you to not stress and maybe do some more, personal pet projects kinds of things. So it's kind of that. But at the same time, when you break it down, it's Vinos is never going to be a mass market game.
You could have said
Germany
any number of the
or
games
otherwise.
That you want. Yeah, it's not. That's the thing. The movie that sells the most tickets is not the highest reviewed movie of the year, and that's the same way that it is with books, with any type of entertainment. People, the vast majority, the entertainment that sells the most is the one that can be accessible to the most people. The one that excludes the least and entertains the most. And, it's kind of an equal amount of that causes people to enter into the hobby. So, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting way to distinguish there. So, do you guys feel that there's any, in trying to make a board game taxonomy, I've been trying to sort of go about, do you think, I mean, it's weird. This is one of those things where I feel like I'm just going to I'm going to say that if this was a cooperative, if this was a solo game that I've been playing here, I feel like the game has beat me. I've lost, because every time that you make a distinction, every time that you say this is something, this is what the board gaming hobby is, or this is the distinction between analog and digital, we can't even agree on that. We can't agree that there's a difference between thematic and strategic. Where would you place war games in those?
It's a little both, but the thing is, with any system of classification, science or otherwise, it's not whether it precisely prescribes everything, but rather, is it useful as a tool? I mean, classifying things in general is a human tool. It's our human need to categorize every dang thing we run across. Mm-hmm. So what the usefulness of it is building up a vocabulary that tells people one way or the other on whether they may be interested in looking at this particular game. So, for once you've been in the hobby for a while, if someone says, "Oh, this is a deck builder," maybe it's not a pure deck builder, but the fact that I know what a deck builder is gives me some insight into what that game is.
So deck builder would be like maybe the family, because I'm not done. I'm not going to let this die yet, Andy. It's deck builder like the family and the category.
Yeah, I mean, when you get down to like games like species and genus, that's where I'm not sure you can get that specific in games. That's like when you're basically down to what is this specific game. But but deck building gives me some knowledge about that game. Okay, it's a deck builder, so I know at the very least I'm going to be doing something like this.
Okay.
And it can give you an idea. So for me, for example, it tells me whether I will want to engage with a game or not. So for me personally, like two sort of classifications of games I avoid for the most part, unless I'm just I have to be in the real right mood for. If someone says, "Oh, this is a party game," I'm just like immediately that's a shutdown for me. I'm just like, I don't really want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, right mood, I may think it's the greatest thing in the world, but it's not something I'm going to gravitate towards. However, also if somebody says this is a trivia game, done. I'm out. Okay, right there. But if somebody else says this is an economic game, now my interest is piqued. So you can use these as a tool to give you a vague notion of what it's going to be about. If you're down to because I guess the thing that gets argued the most that I hear about in the weird little corners I am is war games. Is it a war game or not? And like back and forth. And is coin a war game? Is this war? If you're down to that level of discussion, I think you've missed the point of this being a tool. And because I think what a lot of people do, at least in that war game world, is I don't think they're really wanting to develop a tool out of it. They're wanting to exclude people.
Yeah, they want it to be an exclusive group. And I would say that to a certain extent, Andy, like when you specifically, like when you say hobby board games, that could be viewed, especially as from people on the outside, as like, well, what you're doing and what I'm doing is not that different. It's just that you're elitist about it. You know, it's like you think that your games are better.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I've had to walk that back at times because when I first got into hobby board games, like I was very much more of a snob about it. Like I was looking down at a lot of different games. And then like I had to realize that, you know, this is kind of almost a different topic, but I had to realize that, you know, I was crapping on people's good times,
yeah,
which is not okay. But yeah, like you can use kind of a system of classification as a weapon almost. You know what I mean? It's like, you play those. Like you can use it as a weapon or you can use it as a tool. And if you're using it for a weapon, you're not using it for the right purpose, in my opinion.
But, no, absolutely. I'm on your side here, Andy. That's yeah, exactly. If it's being used as a tool to give people an idea, like Paul has said in our comments, you know, like abstract, thematic, strategic, you know, tactical. What type of you know, planning are you going to be making? What type of choices are you going to be making? What, you know, decisions, or what theme? Like where does theme? Because a game can have a certain set of mechanisms and a certain theme, and it could have a certain level of theme integration. So, you know, thematic integration. There's just a lot of things that you can say, like you said, that could be used as a tool, but that get used as a weapon, get wielded as a weapon by people who want to exclude others. So, Trent, with your definition, can I ask you, was there any the definition you gave of board games, to kind of roll this back here to, which is like essentially finite amount of choices and an end condition. That's all it is in a board game. And
yeah.
Is there any games that caused you to challenge that challenge that, to distinguish that what a board game is versus a role playing game?
I have been trying to think of some, and I can't think of any. They all.
So how would you characterize?
Repeat that one more time.
Fiasco. How would you categorize Fiasco?
You have infinite choices, so it's an RPG.
But there's an end condition, right?
Yeah, but you have to have both of those to be a board game.
Oh, okay. So those are okay.
So yeah, like because I was kind of getting at this, for example, the one that's brought up a lot is Candyland. Candyland does not count as a game because there's no choices. Like, as soon as you sit down to the table, the deck has declared who will win.
Did you choose to play?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a stretch. I'm not gonna.
I'd say, you're splitting hairs there just a bit, but I would say there has to be some form of decision, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a lot of decision.
I think stuff like Candyland is an activity.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think it's a game.
Yeah.
So you have to have a choices, and an end condition.
Point, yeah.
Choices and an end condition.
So then Fiasco's an RPG.
Yeah.
But what if you lay? So I guess everything that I can think of that tries to take an RPG and make it into a board game, essentially what they're doing is taking an infinite amount of choices and then giving you a subset of those that is finite. Like, Descent.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what they do.
Gloomhaven also like reduces the amount of choices to a finite amount. I mean, you can have a campaign, so it's not necessarily that there's I feel like board games have adopted so many elements that make an RPG entertaining, and showed us that, like, a board game isn't just like, hey, this is a bunch of people that are trying to outthink each other. You can be playing a board game as much for the experience you get from playing as you could from an RPG. And I would wager that, for simulation heavy games like your Wargamer crowd, that's one of the biggest draws to them, is these elements that you would think of as being like, telling the story of this historical conflict. So,
Well, and another definition I heard it for a game that's kind of cool. I don't know if it fits, but it's an interesting way to think about it is a game is following a set of rules to take what should be an easy task and make it a more complex, interesting task. Well, no, legitimately, because they used, like, I can't believe it, but I'm going to do a sports metaphor just because this is the one. But they said, take the game of golf, for example, right? So the goal is to get the ball in the hole. The easiest way to do that is to pick up your ball, walk over to the hole, and put it in it. So you're agreeing to make this task more difficult to make it interesting.
Yeah, and then you got sports where you put people in charge of making your job more difficult by playing defense on you.
Exactly. And so, and I think that's an interesting definition. I don't think it applies to everything, but it is kind of funny,
Well, to a certain extent, you could make an argument that that sport follows under the like digital and analog. Like, what would sport be, digital or analog gaming? Because it's certainly a game.
Oh no, this is where I constantly make jocks back because they'll be like, well, that's a game. That's not a sport. I'm like, sport is just a term you came up with to make your game sound more important.
Yeah, to a certain extent, like you could make that same argument that like, what's the difference between a sport? And you could have a tabletop game that involves, a large amount of physical activity, especially thinking like a dexterity game, that involves some physical activity. And then let's take, for example, like track. Is track a game? Is running track, which when I say track, track is an activity here, just, to explain it for people from other countries, we call like track and field activities.
It's basically Olympic-y stuff. Yeah,
Olympic stuff, like challenges where you got like the sprints and stuff. And the track and field. Maybe I'm explaining this, way over explaining this, but I just thought for a second, we call track, like there's a sport here at our school that we call track, and it might not be called the same thing everywhere. I know it's called atletismo in Spanish, but anyway, it's.
There's this element of skill. There's an element of decisions.
Is there really? I mean, like in a 100-yard sprint, it is just run as fast as you can.
No, except that I don't know about that one because there's a lot of like training in how you're going, like, when the gun goes to go and whatnot, there's an element to that. Is there far less decisions in track than there is in even other kinds of sports? Yeah.
Or could you start to say that track is an activity and not a game or not a sport?
I think you're getting farther away from a game when you do track because it is a very like prescribed thing. There's like a best way to do the 100-meter dash based on your body type and whatnot. Like there's a most efficient run you can do.
Okay, like you can train and specifically set yourself up for it. What do you think about that, Trent?
That's reasonable. I don't have any objection to that. That makes sense.
How about bowling? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It sounded like you were still going.
No,
back to track.
I'm not thinking about bowling now.
Okay, all right. So we're on bowling now. So bowling, and then of course the next step is golf. Like golf, Andy has clearly said golf is a game. You know,
Well,
it's like
there is, because based on the position, you do ultimately have to make choices. Which club are you going to use?
Mm-hmm. Well, in bowling, though, I mean, you use your ball and you're trying specifically to do the same activity over and over and over and over and over and just continue to do that one activity perfect. So, I mean, if we're going to call...
So the thing with bowling, though, because I think bowling might go into the game more than a track, or more than track does, because if you think about it, bowling, you throw your ball, you hit some pins, unless you get a strike, you have a set number of pins still up. Then you have to make a decision of how you're going to approach that. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you bowl like I do, which is crappy, and you throw a ball and you end up with pins on both sides, it's like, okay, now I've got a choice. Is there a way I can throw the ball that will get all of them? Probably, but it's probably exceedingly difficult, and I don't have the skill to do that. So am I going to go for the left side or the right side? How am I going to do that? Like, there is a decision-making process there.
Definitely, yeah, and depending on what you might have a split or, you know, the setup that you have that you're left with. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and I wanted to say, well, if you play ideal, then the game is just over. But the thing is,
if you can get strikes every time, but that's not likely.
No, it's not likely. But you could say the same thing about Crokinole. You know, like you could say the same thing where in Crokinole you could, you know, theoretically a perfect game would be just you shooting the puck or whatever you call it, the disc. It's more like a puck than anything else. But yeah, to the center and hit a ringer every time. Like that's theoretically possible. And is Crokinole still a game? Yes, because that never happens. But yeah, it is really interesting to consider, like, you know, yes, these are games, and we're going to call track a game, of course. I mean, but it seems like, you know, there's less decisions to be made, though there still at some point is a decision, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I would say so. Like, there's an ideal way to do it, but you got to kind of think about it. Like, I think in track there's less decision making than there is in a lot of other sports that, you know, would be played. But to take
go ahead.
Doesn't say, but to also bring it back is a game, because, you know, particularly as a middle school teacher, I have students poo-pooing on games because they're not sports. And then they're like floored when I'm like, chess is an Olympic sport. Like, legitimately, they don't do it at the Olympics, but it's in the Olympic roster as an Olympic sport. Okay. Like there's a category they have in the Olympics. They call, like, it's something like mind competition or something like that, of which chess is a subset.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I feel like you could really start to add, you know, if you added esports in, I feel like, you know, what the future looks like in terms of the Olympic Games and whether or not they ever will adopt esports as being. So
we dropped to the long jump in favor of StarCraft.
Well, what though about this? What about this? Because we decided, I feel like we decided earlier that Candyland does not qualify itself as a game. That we disagree that it's a game because there has to be decision somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So it would you agree the same way if you take the betting aspect out of, like, craps and you just try to seed a roll and see how high you can get? Or what about the game like LCR, where the game is just on rails, where you roll dice and then you just do what it says and you never make a single decision? It's just, you know, the dice just play out the game, right? Like,
well, with crap, like, I don't know craps well, so I have.
It's about the betting, right? So I'm talking about essentially taking the gaming aspect out of craps, right? And you wouldn't do that, okay? Fair enough, whatever.
Well, no, I was more thinking with craps, like, I've heard there are distinct betting strategies for craps, like. Mm-hmm. More so than many other gambling games, like craps, there is like decisions to make on the betting based on what's going on. Like, there was someone who was telling me once that, like, if you're really good at craps, it's one of the few games in the casino where you could go in and reasonably expect to come out ahead.
Uh-huh.
Like, there is definitely some decision. where, like, we'll say this, there's definitely decisions in craps as compared to, say, a roulette wheel.
Yeah. Which
For
is
sure.
pretty, yeah. Every round is going to be the same. Yeah, I get what you're saying. How about this comparison, right? Because we're saying that Candyland doesn't qualify as a game. It would qualify, just so you guys know. Like, if we're going off a dictionary here, which we had this discussion at game night actually with former host Jonathan Pierce, who, by the way, is a really good bowler. A game like Candyland would qualify as a game because the element of chance is worked into the Webster's dictionary definition. Like, if it's a game of chance, it could also work, where it's not just like skill is not necessarily inherent to it, like either there isn't that necessary part of it. Like, chance qualifies it as a game underneath the dictionary definition, but we're kind of creating our own definition based on our own experiences. We're not trying to say
I don't know about that, though, because with Candyland, I guess there's chance only in the sense of what order did you sit down at the table?
Well, I mean, if you have a spinner like they did in some of the original ones, it's just...
Oh, okay. Yeah, so in the card ones, like, once that deck is there, it's predetermined who's going to win.
It is predetermined, but the thing is, the shuffle created chance in the first place.
Okay, you're going with that.
Yeah. Here's what I would say, though, is... Well, like, to compare that to something in sporting, like, T-ball, for example. T-ball can be something where kids go up and they hit the ball, and you actually play the game of baseball trying to get that person out. Or T-ball can be like it is in the very, very young kid leagues, where, like, the kid hits the ball and then immediately advances on to first base, and you don't actually play the game of baseball. It's just kind of like, essentially a simulation of hitting a ball on a stick to then practice running the bases to sort of like set yourself up to actually start making some of the decisions, which they might make in like some of the higher level T-ball, where they have like the adults pitching, and then eventually get to the point where you actually have the kids pitch, in like a little league format, and then finally, like, you start turn on the gears and making it more and more difficult, making it, the rules don't change so much, but the rule changes are more slight and more to... I feel like the rules changes from like little league to a higher level pony league or whatever would be like to kind of protect the kids from like, having a ball thrown too fast at them or something, do you guys agree? Like, would T-ball, when a kid steps up to the plate, hits the ball, and then immediately walks probably with their dad or mom standing right next to them to first base, regardless of whether or not that ball even went anywhere, is that still a game?
I think at that point, you're kind of losing the element of a game. What you're really doing there is training them for a higher level thing that is a game later on. To bring it into my lovely weird world, there's an 18xx, I think it's called 1800. It's basically a print and play. Anyway, but basically there's 2 companies and 4 towns. Like, there really isn't any decisions to make in the game. Basically, it's a teaching tool to teach you the basics of buying stock and building track and running trains.
Yeah.
That's basically all there is to it. And there's definitely an optimal way to play it. And yeah, there's very little decision making there. It's basically, if you need a tool for someone who really is struggling with the idea of even wanting to try an 18xx, here you can use this training program, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, Pee Wee soccer is kind of like that almost even. It's just like, hey, if they're kicking the ball around and generally like heading towards a goal, cheer. But yeah, to me, I guess, I never did T-ball or really ever watched it, but from the way you describe it, I wouldn't call it a game at that point. It's really an activity, training them to play a game,
like you said, a teaching activity to prepare them for the game. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Trent, would you be willing to accept elements of chance into the choice? So would you say something that has choice and or chance and an end condition?
Sure, I guess. I kind of think games that are just purely chance and you never have a decision or activities rather than games.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
kind of why I lie.
Yeah.
I kind of lean that way as well. Like,
what about when you stop keeping score in a game? When you start oh, we're just drawing cards, and for example, is Telestrations a game?
No,
it's an activity.
Yep.
It has rules to be able to make it into a game, but those rules tend to be less engaging to many groups than just actually participating in the activity part of it.
Yeah, that's the thing with them. Like, if you've ever listened to ludology podcasts, they always talk about the magic circle, like the social agreement we're making to play the game.
Yes.
And
very fascinating.
Right. And this is where I think, like, for me, a lot of party games kind of break down, because it often seems with a lot of quote unquote party games, the most fun you can have at it is by totally just trashing the magic circle. Like in Telestrations, for example, the most fun way to do it is see what you get and then just put down the most ridiculously stupid thing it could be down, or drawing to see where it goes after that. It's like when I would play apples to apples, and like instead of picking the best choice, I would always try to pick the most inappropriate choice.
Yeah, which it could be frustrating to players that felt like they played something that was really appropriate.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, almost everybody laughs about that. And to me, that's, I guess, where I feel where it becomes an activity is everyone's laughing at what you're doing and no one's really taking it seriously. Mm-hmm. And nobody really cares about the end condition. I mean, that's the thing with kind of Telestrations is there's a scoring system, but nobody cares about it. Mm-hmm. And if you could still do the thing you're doing without caring about the scoring system, to me, you're getting into the realm of activity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it depends on how you play it. I mean, some people I know do enjoy playing Telestrations with its included rules for scoring, and trying to getting points every time that your specific drawing got communicated accurately, which is, if you win, can be really boring. Can be really boring.
I was going to say, it's less interesting if you behave in the magic circle for activities, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think to a certain extent, though, depending on the gamer, they might enjoy breaking that magic circle even in other environments. I mean, and that can be disruptive to the play of others, but could still be enjoyable to them. Would you guys agree with that to some extent?
What were you saying, Trent?
I feel like most things that are like a fun activity that you shoehorn into being a game become less enjoyable as a game. Mm-hmm. And that's an example of that. I can't think of anything where it's a mediocre activity, but it becomes a great game.
Yeah.
Like, it's always like it's a decent activity, but if you turn it into a game, it's like, meh.
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel like as well.
That's the problem with dexterity. Well, I don't know. I will stop there. I feel like I opened up a can of worms and don't want to. You say what you were going to say, Andy.
What's that?
I was going to say you pick it up, because I was going to say that's why I think that dexterity doesn't mix well with heavier game mechanisms. It's like,
I don't think it does, but
it's a different skill set. It's like the rest of these skills seem connected to each other, and to a certain extent, though, that might be part of what makes it feel exclusive, and part of what make people say well, I don't want you to call yourself a war gamer, because when you say war gamer, I specifically want it to mean that you have experience in these certain game systems that we have denoted as being like this is a war gamer. Like when I say train gamer, somebody who's new to the hobby be like, oh, I really like Ticket to Ride. I'm a train gamer too. Whereas people who play 18xx are going to be like, no, that's not what he means by train gamer. And a lot of people also in 18xx accept the term just 18xxer, just like that as a term. He's an 18xxer. As opposed to a train gamer, and just use the train gamer term colloquially around others that they understand it. So I don't think it's always used it can be used tool wise by that own group. It's like, okay, well, you're a war gamer. So when somebody says I'm a war gamer, you don't want to have to ask them, well, are you familiar with, Advanced Squad Leader, ASL, the sort of
that's
sandbox of war games.
Are they calling themselves a war gamer and they've only played Risk, which arguably is still a war game? Mm-hmm. I would have a hard time saying it's not, but at the same time, because you do use it for identification. If someone comes up and says, "Oh, I'm a war gamer. Can we play one of your war games?" And you're throwing down, enemy action Ardennes, and what they were meaning was like something like Risk.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a mismatch there. But I think that's still kind of it still puts it in the realm of tool. Like, I think, if somebody says, "Oh, I'm primarily a Euro gamer," I can use that to decide a game that maybe we can enjoy playing together. However, like, those things have been used and still currently can be used as weapons, where someone's like, "Oh, I really like Eldritch Horror. I'm a Euro gamer. I don't play Ameritrash." Like, it's all based on the intention of what you're trying to do with it.
I feel like, Andy, that probably I feel like the term Ameritrash itself leads me to believe that it started with Eurogamer being a pejorative term.
Absolutely.
And then the Ameritrash term is like a clearly shots fired, like suns out, guns out term to describe, games that are not what American, or thematic style gamers would classify as being in the category of games that they like, right? We've got like this big divide between the types of enjoyment and entertainment that people are looking for, in between, sort of like a competitive and, mechanism-based activity versus like a storytelling and dramatic moments and, like thematic activity, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think as long as you're using it as a tool, like the classification system that's kind of being done does make sense. And I think right now there's also so much cross-pollination within the different quote-unquote genres of gaming that we're kind of at a point where you can't easily classify things anymore. Like, it's getting to the point where it's really hard to just say, this is a solid just Euro game. Because typically before that would have meant no dice. But now you have Trois, you have Signore, you have Madeira.
And even early Euro games, though, you have like a lot of early Euro games that use dice, like Settlers of Catan. I mean, they still use dice, and they still have many times very high elements of randomness, So it's not like the absence of randomness, I think, is something that's more later on into Euro games than even that, like the original absence of randomness.
Sure. Where was it? I was reading about that. It was the late 90s, early 2000s, but there was somewhere in that range where like Euro games were just like, we cannot have any dice for any reason. And then like they kind of started creeping their way back in as people are like, "Oh no, wait, I can actually do interesting things with these." But yeah, and that's what I said. So I guess really, we could go around and around on this for weeks, but but in that, I don't know, you do that too much with classification, you'll descend into madness. But I think it's ultimately for me, the importance is, what are you trying to use this system of classification for? If you're using it as a tool, I think you're probably doing what you should be doing. But if you're using it as an exclusionary weapon, knock it off. I mean,
yeah. Well, what's interesting about that though is I think even at some level, like it depends, like, when you've got people that crisscross and have enjoyment from many different elements in the same category, like, for example, in tabletop, you can enjoy many different elements of it and have all these elements represented at a convention. Like, that's when you end up with sort of like mixing between groups. Like the easiest time for these categories to be weaponized, and it's like a weaponized tool, is when it's like either you're in or you're out. Like, and I just kind of picture, like you've got like every game group, especially if it doesn't have a large enough population to diversify, ends up sort of taking on an identity of its own. And, like, they're like newer players have that choice of like, well, these are the types of games that we play, and whether or not that's, the categorical terms end up getting used as a weapon, or, to a certain extent, it's kind of like, they almost can be used as an advertising, tool as well. And when they're used that way, it really is frustrating. It sounds like it's like almost propaganda at that point, where it's like, saying war games to describe like Hex Encounter versus any other type of conflict games, or saying, like a strategic game to describe any game that's not, like a thematic American game, that would offend people. Like there are a lot of people who play Risk consider themselves very good Risk players.
Yeah.
Especially people that aren't super experienced in other tabletop games consider themselves very, very good at that game. See their choices as having a large impact on how it comes out.
Yeah.
They believe that. People think, like, especially my students, find themselves say that they are very good Monopoly players. Like, I'm really good at Monopoly. They think that. And the way that they play Monopoly essentially turns it into a whoever can roll the right numbers wins, but they don't see that. They see I'm really, really good at this type of a game.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one of my students here in our chat that's just shared with our group the fact that he is the best Monopoly player. That's absolutely right. I'm so proud of you. Thank you. Timed it perfectly there, knowing where he stands in this group. And we've actually had this talk in my class, and I don't want to admit that we used class time, but we maybe used a little bit of class time to go off on a 2-minute tangent about why you can't be a good Monopoly player if you play it like this. But anyway, technically still teaching things, even though sometimes those things that I'm teaching are just my own opinions and don't have any actual real world usefulness, nor do they have any validity. So, and that's why you shouldn't listen to me or listen to Trent. He thinks before he talks.
That's the reason a lot of times I don't say much. I actually listen a lot on these recordings.
Mm-hmm, yeah. really listen to Trent. He thinks before he talks. So
we're going to get Joe a sign for his wall that's like, what was the one that's, it's better to be silent and thought a fool than to speak and be proven one.
The only time I talk a lot is when I'm trash talking. Which
that's fair.
People at Sunday night are aware of my trash talking. So
trash talking or turning a game that's not a negotiation game into a negotiation game.
That's what I do. That's what I do.
Speaking of which, you should start bringing Rising Sun, Trent.
I'm going to bring it this Sunday, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, man. That's a game that should be turned into diplomacy. So.
Hi, it's Joe from GBU, and I want you to be an outlaw. Well, not literally. I want you to join in the community of GBU listeners who have grown a liking to calling themselves outlaws. I invite you to join our BGG Guild. Go to BoardGameGeek.com/guild/2173. How about following @GoodBoardUgly on Twitter? Email GBU direct at goodboardugly@gmail.com. Good Board Ugly is not responsible for any criminal behavior committed by its podcast community.
Well, and speaking of what we're looking forward to, let's go ahead and hype some games here, guys. And Trent, why don't you kick it off? Because he'll be telling us all about just a prototype game.
Yes, I'm going to talk about the Coin Tribes Revolt. It's a game it's currently up for the 9-card nano game print and play design contest. And it's basically an attempt to reduce a coin game down to 9 cards. And that's like the attempt here. It has 9 cards, 4 of which form the map. And then it has 2 event cards that really work in a clever way to get as much value out of them as you possibly can. And then basically 3 other cards that control the game mechanisms. And then it also has 18 dice, most of which are used for multi-value markers, so you can rotate the dice to indicate a different number depending on how many troops are in an area, for example. I've read the rules several times, and I communicated with the designer on Twitter some, and she sent me a prototype of it, and I've looked at the prototype, and I'm really eager to try this. I couldn't really understand how you could shrink a coin game down that much, but I think this is about as good as I think you could possibly do, given that restriction.
Yeah, I saw this on some P&P forum somewhere, and I was like, that sounds interesting.
It is. It's pretty impressive how much game is in it. It takes an hour to play, and it's 9 cards and 18 dice.
That's actually not bad for a coin game.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, I'm completely stunned by the design aspect of it, and I'm really looking forward to playing it soon. And that is the Coin Tribes Revolt. I wouldn't be surprised that if this is actually good, and a lot of the other people talking about it are saying positive things about it, this could end up getting printed as a small, like, a very small, almost micro game from a company at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I'm very excited to play this prototype. It seems very interesting. If you search Coin Tribes Revolt on Google, you'll quickly find the thread on Board Game Geek about it. It doesn't have its own entry now, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did at some point.
That just makes me ask a bunch of questions in my own head.
Yeah, no, I've looked at it. I've got the PNG files. It definitely looks, interesting.
Yeah, she sent me a copy of the prototype in the mail, and it literally fits in like a normal deck of card size box because the dice are small.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting.
But it's still based on coin.
Yeah, it's like I said, the map is basically 4 cards laid out in a 2x2 grid.
Yep.
And all the action selection and everything is done via like rotating dice and moving cards around.
I definitely want to try this one out. Yeah, that seems like the perfect Trent hype. It really does. It's just with a bow on top. This is like, here's a game that can't exist.
I love finding those. It's like games where I'm like, what? I love them. I'm just like, I love it. I want to see, how did you do that? I want to see it. And this is right up that alley.
Nice. Well, the perfect Trent hype is a game that can't exist but does. And my hype here is the perfect hype for me because it's just bathed in shame. There's nothing here but shame as I hype this because two different types of shame. One of them is the shame that I feel for first of all, not giving this game the chance that it deserved. And secondly, the shame I feel for actually hyping it. It's weird. It's like I'm feeling both sides of the shame at the same time. And let me explain what I mean by that. I'm hyping the expansions to Mystic Vale that came out post Vale of Magic, which would be the first one, I believe. So the first expansion to Mystic Vale, of course, the card crafting game where you've got cards that have sleeves, and they're a very simple, very barren deck of cards that start. But you can add like sort of advancements, I think they call them, but I want to say enhancements. That sounds, I don't know, that sounds like something that belongs in a TV ad, though. Anyway, you're going to put advancements in these cards. You can have up to 3 different advancements that add effects, and then there's other sorts of effects like current, like extra money that can be produced or bad things that can be produced on certain cards, and then other sorts of abilities that kind of are read at a landscape angle. So there can be like up to like there's a dozen or so different icons potentially that cards could end up having, and there's way more, and there's effects and stuff like that. But the base game in Mystic Vale turned me off fairly quickly when I first played it, and this was, I think, largely because it was quite a bit I think there was a lot riding on Mystic Vale. It was like, here's this new system, and I felt like there were certain concessions that I had to make about this new system that I wasn't willing to adopt into, to buy into this idea that okay, well, here's a deck of 20 cards, and I'm going to build these cards to be my own specific deck. I'm never going to add any cards. It's always going to be exactly 20 cards. What I'm going to do is add sort of like advancements to make this 20 card deck better every time I get through it. And then one of the biggest things they did was have like a sort of push your luck element to the game. And this is because you're not, like, when you take away the sort of hand limit to how many, to what the amount of draw that you have in a game is, because you fix the amount of cards in a deck. So you fix the amount of cards, well, then that sort of makes deck building difficult. And so they had to build a different system, and they came up with a push your luck system by which, like, if the wrong card comes up, you end up sort of just ditching your whole hand. And that to me was something I'd never experienced before in a deck building style game. And when you equate card crafting to deck building, because there's a lot of shared lineage there, they'd probably be in this taxonomy here of the same what's above family, Andy?
I don't know. Classification's not that useful.
Order is above family.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe be of the same order, but then different families, right? But they'd be of the same order, which is like these games where you're pool building, right? And then the classification underneath there, you'd have like your sort of card crafting system versus like your deck building where you're actually like adding cards to this deck. And then, of course, you've got games like Orleans that do this in a different way as well. But anyway, the thing that I couldn't come to terms with was the fact that I could like totally lose a turn. Like, it's like you have a lose a turn element to the game. And that's like, Andy, we've talked about this before. Losing it, but the thing is, you're in control of that lose a turn element, right? And not only that, but there's also a game mechanic built in by which you've got this token that you flip to give you an extra current and extra money. I forget. They're like little bulbs. I forget what they're called. But, an extra money to spend every time that you spoil is what it's called. So you don't get to take your turn, but you do get to flip this card. And so, like, you have to kind of decide, like, okay, is there anything useful for me to do with this turn? And do I currently have my spoil token? Like, is my token, is it flipped or not? And so there's actually some interesting decisions that get made in this. It still has that spineless element like Ascension, where it's just all these cards that are out, and you're just picking from all these cards that you can't really predict what's going to come up next. You just kind of shuffle and draw them out. I honestly feel like the entire reason I'm hyping this is because I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the expansions. So what caused me to make this big 180 and start appreciating this game? And the answer to that is simply playing it online. Because playing it online took out some of the things that frustrated with me. So like all the upkeep is just done by the game. So all these things that happen automatically just happen by the game. And that inherently just kind of can make a game experience more preferable. But also, like, some of the things that I disliked about the game system, where I felt kind of like, okay, well, I can see the upcoming advancement, and I feel like I shouldn't be able to. You know what I'm talking about, Trent? Like, you can see, like, because these cards are transparent that you're adding, you can, like, theoretically look down and see, if you have good enough eyes, and also if there's, if the cards are splayed, like, if they're staggered correctly, you can see not just the next card, but up to, like, the next 3 cards that would be coming out.
We've started covering up the stack with a unused Vale card, or shuffling the stack before a new one's added.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you can just peek too much, and whoever can see the best gets an advantage.
Yeah, it's an advantage that doesn't feel like it should be in the game. And without the advantage, it's kind of an element of randomness, but then you've got other elements that are balancing out the randomness in this game that actually do, I do enjoy it. Now, there's nothing about this game, like, thematically, it's frustrating, I would say. It's a very thematically frustrated game where there's nothing about, like, any card, just nothing about the woodland druid theme really comes out at any level with any of the base game or the first expansion, which is, in my opinion, the most should have been included in the base game expansion of all time. Like, it is absolutely a travesty. It did not get included in the base game, and the fact that it's even called an expansion. But I can see that they wanted to make it a $40 game or a $45 game and not a $60 game. I still think it was a terrible move. I'm frustrated that I had to pay an extra $30 to get what feels like it should have come in the base game. I feel the base game is somewhat incomplete without it. But I'm really excited because the other 2 expansions actually start adding new things. So whereas I really panned that first expansion when it came out, I view it now as being an integral part in a game system that I actually have come around on. And I'm really excited to see how, like, the leader cards that you can get, and then the unique tokens that you can get that come with a point penalty based on what they are. I'm really excited to see what direction it's going to go. And I even will end up getting the Conclave, which is just essentially like the smash up huge box. It's basically that, except it comes with an actual few game things, and you can play with 5 and 6 players. But yeah, that's why I'm hyping all of the Mystic Vale expansions, except for the first one, because I actually own those 2, and nothing about them really excites me enough to hype them. But I really want to see what's coming out. So that's my hype. Like I said, bathed in shame, because I kind of feel like I still shouldn't like the game. But hey, you know what? I like it, and so I'm fine with that. That's shame that I'm okay with dealing with. But I'm even more ashamed that I didn't give it the chance it deserved when it came out.
Mystic Vale should have had the leaders in the core box.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the only real major complaint I've ever heard about the game, was that it felt like the main game was just showing you a system, but that the game the game that this system should have been will be later once they put out expansions. Like, that's the general gist I got from everybody about that game.
I'll be honest. the 3 small box expansions all kind of flow together for me. I can't really say in what's and what, but I will say that when the leaders were added, that made a huge difference, and leaders probably should have been in the core game. I think they make a huge difference. They make your starting deck distinct, and like you feel like you're aiming for different things, whereas with generic starting decks, it feels very formless. I really think if you're playing a game where it has like a dynamic line of cards to draft from, your starting deck should be dynamic and different each game, because that directs you towards an actual strategy instead of choosing best card.
Yeah, which is just based on whatever comes out when, in the types of games when, I buy a card and a new card becomes available, and then I go, oh, well, now that card came out. Oh, I would have bought that. That sucks.
Yep,
So
that's... If you have a distinct starting card in your deck, or a distinct starting deck of some kind, that changes that and that goes away. It's one of the things I liked about Dungeon Alliance. And it's one of the things I really like about the leaders in this, is that you're aware of what your leader is. You know it makes you distinct in a certain area. You're going to be aiming for something a little different than the other players. And so you can start planning ahead more, because even if like the card you need is one of the best cards out there, the other people probably aren't going to take it because they're going to be more interested in what synergizes with their leader.
And I agree.
Leaders are great.
They give you a little bit more direction. So the big thing that I really was impressed about, and I don't think any review has really gone into how well the system actually allows for this. Like in your normal deck building game or pool building game, it seems like you're almost always either able to buy as many things as you want, or only able to buy like one thing at a time. Would you guys agree to that? Like if there's a limitation, it's usually either there's no limitation, buy as much as you want, or you just buy one card, like say Dominion, where it's very, very... In Mystic Vale, you have 2 that you're allowed to. And here's what I think is really genius about this that doesn't get mentioned. You are able to basically, on your turn, craft a card. Like, because there's like 3 different slots that you can craft into. So like a lot of times, like just being able to buy one card, it's like, well, this card gives me this much stuff as long as it's on a card that has this other stuff on it. But it's not really beneficial by itself. But if I can, in one turn, buy this together with this and put them on this card that already has this, well, I've just made this card. I've turned this card that used to be a crappy card when it came out that made my deck less efficient. I've now canceled that thing that's on there by adding something that was even worse on it, but then adding something that sort of canceled all but one of those negative things. So, I mean, there's some really cool, like, you can actually craft a card on your turn, but you're not just able to craft as much as you please. It's like you can basically build a card, but you have to still maximize just those 2 buys that you get, as well as how much money you're making. And it has that next level of play, like that level of play where when you play Dominion, high-level Dominion players always like just draw up their whole deck. Well, in Mystic Vale, you can eventually get to the point where your combination of things allow you to basically just draw your entire deck. But you have to work towards that. So anyway, it's cool that it has that next level, and I really didn't give it credit for that before when I had played it. So a lot of things emerged as I was able to play it a lot more on the on Yukata.de, which is a great place to play board games. All right, and rounding us all out here for our hype is Andy telling us about the newest game from a designer that started with a take that game that evolved into something absolutely beautiful. And it sounds like it turned into Andy's favorite game, literally Andy's favorite game. And I'm not going to tell any of the rest of your story, but it's just crazy that they could develop such a simple concept into something so complex. And I'm wondering, where in development is the game that Andy's hyping?
Yeah, so I was going to hype this I think actually this just got announced this morning. But it's a partnership between Capstone Games and Start Player Games, which were the original publishers of the game Three Kingdoms Redux, as well as with Capstone, the reprinting of Three Kingdoms Redux, which arguably is my favorite game. It's just what I consider the definition of this game literally is perfect. In my opinion, nothing can be done to change it. So their next game has just been announced, as Clay's going to be doing through Capstone the English printing for it, or in the States or something like that. But it's called Race for the Chinese Zodiac. So it sounds kind of like it's a race game. There's really not a lot of information out about it, other than there's going to be all these different animals you're playing, and you're all trying to race to the Zodiac so that you can become one of the Zodiac signs. Which is an interesting, very, Asian theme on that, which is what I think they're going for. As far as like weight, mechanics, or anything, there's really nothing out here yet. But just on the strength of Three Kingdoms Redux alone, I was having a discussion with a couple people on Twitter today, and they're like, "Oh, is this an insta buy?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm not big on race games, so I don't know if it's an insta buy, but it's definitely going to get a good looking at from me."
Yeah. Just because of their resume, what they've designed for.
And that's the one piece of information they have, like Clay did give, was that this has been a 3 to 4 year development process for this game. With it sounds like basically they put the same diligence and effort into the playtesting of this game as they did in Three Kingdoms Redux, which is always a good sign.
Very cool. The main question I would have is this going to play with more than 3?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. How many signs are in a Zodiac? 12, whatever.
Yeah, like a lot. So,
yeah.
But it's a Chinese Zodiac, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
As opposed to...
So it's like you're the horse rather than like Pisces.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
No, I know the difference.
Yeah, because that's the prize, is you want to get to the Chinese Zodiac so you can get a year named after you.
I forgot that we even called those Zodiacs, that we have 2 different types of Zodiac. Wow.
I just want to make a quick point that I hyped a 9-card micro game, and it was the heaviest of the 3 games hyped.
Well, yeah.
We don't know about the race game yet. There's not a lot of info on it.
If they started with a simple take that card game and made it into Three Kingdoms Redux, well, if this one started as a gateway game, it's going to end up heavier. Yeah. It's going to end up like a World in Flames level.
Yeah, it'll be crazy. It'll be like, well, we started with Monzo and we ended up here.
Nice. Well, beautiful. It's been wonderful chatting with you guys here. This is a really exciting time. Thank you very much for accommodating my changing schedule. Quickly congratulate the tennis team. The boys that I coach have advanced to the Final Four teams in the state of Iowa, and I'll be bringing a couple of those boys up to the singles and doubles tournament. So that's why we couldn't do it on our normal Thursday time. So, but anyway, thank you all that joined us tonight, and thanks to you two guys. I'm the host of Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, Joe Stalin. I've been joined by Andrew Dennison. Andy, good night to you.
Good night.
Trent Ham. See you later, buddy. And that's this episode of the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. Have a good, great, better, whatever, the best week of gaming you can possibly have. And I will catch you on our next episode as a teacher in summer. So that'll be my first day of summer in our next recording for the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. I'm excited to announce a special deal for listeners of Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. Check out the podcast picks at GameStarPlus.com. Add them to your cart. Then during checkout, enter code GoodBoredUglyPicks, all one word, for 10% off your Good, Bored, Ugly picks for LiveSharpLess.com.
Yeah.
Just, that's interesting. Yeah. Like, who's going to keep it? And if it's not just based on pure profit, that's be interesting to see. I mean, there's a lot of I feel like schools are changing for that direction too, Andy. I think that, I don't know. I'm just going to go on a limb here and say that, the school that I went to, it felt weird watching movies that were written by people that were adults and had gone to school about a decade or so before me, because movies like Billy Madison made it look like, the school was just this huge bullying fest, just that it was just normal, like swirlies or I never heard of a single person getting a swirly in my entire high school. And it's gotten even more like schools nowadays, the bullying is, why would you bully somebody in person? I mean, the school has cameras everywhere. Bullying right now is just happening online. You grab your phone and you say something nasty about somebody. That's how bullying happens. And I think
in the high school, in the middle school, we still get on-site stuff.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I mean, the way that it's portrayed, especially in the movie 13. I was just watching recently, 13 Reasons Why. Me and my wife started up. Yeah, we started
I hate that series.
Did you watch it?
No, I read about the album.
I knew you'd say no, Andy. I knew you'd say no. But I watched the first season, and I didn't agree with everything, but I felt like it was entertaining, and I felt like it was also, it seemed like they tried to be sort of, at least keep consciousness of the fact that it was, fiction. But I feel like in the second one, it's just, there's no creativity, and it's all just blunt, like, this is horrible stuff that kids could do to each other. It seems like it's just like outward bullying. Like, why would somebody go and spend $50, to bully someone by buying something and then writing on it, like buying something expensive and then writing on it and then leaving it in their like locker or something. That just seems ridiculous to me.
Well, the thing I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I was curious about how this turned out. So I actually went and looked at some plot synopsises or something like that, because I didn't have any intention of watching it.
I guess, yeah, I don't want to do spoilers just in case, but yeah, I'll answer what I can.
Yeah, basically the gist I got out of it was like at the end of the first season or whatever, you had people like realizing what they had done and becoming better people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's total BS. Like suicide, there's nothing good that comes out of that ever for anyone. Mm-hmm. And
no, yeah, like, yeah,
and having some personal experience with that, like that attitude just rubs me the wrong way.
And I agree, like that's the fundamental issue with it, is that it does make it seem like there were problems that were solved by this suicide.
Exactly, and see, to me, that invalidates everything else. Like it's done. And that, yeah, that's one I make no bones about. Like, and someone asked me what I thought about it once, and I'm like, basically, I think I said, I'm like, there's no way that author actually experienced that in real life, or he wouldn't be writing that crap. That's no,
yeah,
it was not okay for me. And that's why I looked it up. I wanted to see is this going to be treated real like as it should be, or is it going to be treated as, we'll wrap up some positive aspect at the end?
Yeah, no, it is definitely treated in a way that's like, this is tragic, let's feel bad, and let's, she has this dramatic impact. The suicide has a dramatic impact.
And see, like I said, having some experience with that one, which is a lovely deep topic for our listeners, but someone in that situation, the last thing you want to do is give them an idea that doing that will be a positive net outcome.
Yes, exactly. Because that's exactly what depression is going to feed on. It's going to specifically feed on like thinking that this right here, which I'm already considering, would actually like I would end up being a hero. This like, and in a way, like, that is like what some of the outcomes are. Now, the thing, like the second season, I don't think I'm going to watch anymore. I watched like an episode and a half, and it was just like, this is just the same stuff we already saw. Like this it's like a computer program watched the first season and then created at least what I've seen so far, where it is literally just more of the same. And I was very disappointed, and I didn't want to watch it anymore. So we're not going to. I do think, though, I've heard some really positive things about the show The Fosters, which is like about sort of foster children. It's like a Netflix series. Yeah, and the idea, like I feel like the idea of like a foster system, I have no idea about it. Like, I mean, I just heard positive things from. Let's put it like this: I kind of feel like I had a little bit of a hole there, where I was planning on watching this new season of 13 Reasons Why. And part of it is like research, Andy. Like I kind of, like this is kids watch the heck out of Netflix, and to a certain extent, like understanding what's in there, what they're getting is I feel like going to somewhat give me something to share with them, to I don't know, just something to relate with them on. But I don't think that like 13 Reasons Why to me did not seem like it was something that I also have to be entertained by it, right? And I was not entertained. So ultimately, like since it wasn't entertaining me, I just wasn't going to watch it.
Well, yeah, and see, for me, like I there's no way I could get through it. That's just too close to home.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's there's just no way that was ever going to happen. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I know my students do I don't know much about. But
oh no, yeah, and I'm not saying like that's You know what I mean? I do want to watch, like, they watch a lot of Netflix shows, right?
Oh,
and I mean, like,
absolutely.
like I do think that the idea of a show that deals with like children that are going through the foster care system, like that to me is a relevant topic that's never been handled. So from what I've heard, it's still your silly drama, but yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, like with that, is that's interesting because ultimately, in the end of that system, there can be a net positive outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you showed things getting better, like that legitimately is something that can happen. And so I don't know. It was really interesting. But when I was in 7th grade, like in Atumwa, they did these big summer class trips you could earn money to. And one was we went out west to Yellowstone and went to this horseback ride. It was like a breakfast / then you rode trails with the horses there. And that's apparently, from what we were told by one of the teachers, was telling my group about it, that it's all a foster home situation. Mm-hmm. So this guy basically, typically they're high school aged kids. So they're like already past where most people want to adopt them. And they're really hard lives. So like literally it's either go to him or go to juvenile detention. Mm-hmm. And so he takes them and tries to, through like serving others, through raising horses to learn empathy and stuff like that. Apparently he has a really high success rate with turning a lot of kids heading for some really bad ends around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. And so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I do think that like the turning the lives around is, the fosters. We just had a question here. I'll just say it instead of typing it. It's basically a family that has a last name Foster in it. Like their last name is Foster, and then they adopt foster children. So I mean, I think that's kind of like I guess the clever writing of it, whatever, is that they're foster children and their name is Foster. So even if they're not a foster kid, they're still a foster kid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it looked to me like it was like something that would be at least interesting, and like one of those kind of, I never watched Seventh Heaven, but I kind of understood what it kind of was trying to do, sort of be like, like work things out as a family. And
yeah.
Anyway, The Fosters does have a lot of, sort of social issues, I think, that they touch on. So that's I guess what's kind of appealing about it, to to think like, and also just to try to keep up on these are shows that just recently hit Netflix, so they didn't start there, and like they just become available on Netflix. And my wife really likes real life. That's, I think, the biggest thing is that like she will avoid anything like the plague. Like I'll end up watching Westworld alone because she ended up falling asleep. And I kind of understood it with Westworld. Like that had a bit of a slow boil there at the beginning. It wasn't really until the last episode.
Like episode 3 or 4 now.
I haven't seen the second season at all, but she tried to watch the first season with me, and yeah, she fell asleep. It just she can't relate to something when it's so when it's far fetched to the point where like she just can't imagine. It's so distant to her. And she doesn't like any genre outside of like a a sitcom rom-com type thing. So
yeah.
Hi, I'm here.
Trent, hello, sir.
Hello.
Sounds
Welcome
like
to therapy with good board ugly.
Yeah, we were talking. We just kind of got onto the topics of like shows that we watch because our kids watch, and shows that are popular right now. We talked. Andy condemned 13 Reasons Why, which I kind of endorse and understand exactly why you'd say that. And the second season, to me, I would also condemn just because I thought it was terrible. Like I just thought it was bad television, bad drama. In addition to its kind of like an underlying issue of making
I'm not saying it's bad, but I've had more entertaining bowel movements.
Haven't we all?
Yeah. Trent's actually having one right now.
Yeah. Well, it is hard to like beat a really good poop.
Well, especially when you can take it onto the board of an 18xx game.
Right. Yeah. By the way, if nobody's guessed, I'm a middle school teacher. That's why I make these jokes. You should see us at teacher meetings. They always know the middle school teachers.
Yeah, the middle school teachers that say the things that then silence the entire group and make them want to move on to the next topic.
Oh yeah, like what was it? The last one we did at the zoo, we had to make like creatures out of like random like pieces of stuff, like crafty things. And I was sitting at the table with middle school teachers, and we're the only ones that came up with a reproduction strategy.
Yeah. Well, we've got a full house here in our chat. We got Ray joining us, who's he's like, I guess, the guest that we'd introduced first in our chat. We've also got some returning muscle in the form of Norm, Paul, who's been who's here commenting on our commentary. And yeah, it's great to see all of you in our chat, and we're gonna get going, eh? How about it, Norm? We're about to get going, eh?
That's how you write that? I just thought you wrote the letter A.
Andy, just don't spell anything. Let me or Trent spell. Like, if you want to write something, just let me or Trent take a look at it first.
Oh, I caused the English teacher to hang her head today. I was like walking past her like sign. She tells all the students what you have to bring. And she put down laptops. I'm like, you don't even want to know how many years I thought that P was a B. She's just like, go away.
Oh my gosh. Laptops.
Yeah, well, I'm a science person. It made sense.
What? Why? Why would it be a laptop? Like, what? It's not always... because you think computers are only in labs. You are such a science elitist. No.
That's because it's better.
Wow. Well, let's get this here show on the road. We're gonna start off the episode now. And Trent, do you just want to kind of breeze on over your review, or?
I don't have anything to say. I have literally not played a game since last Thursday, so.
Yeah.
So Trent, I stalked you a bit to try to come up with something that you could play. I figured that you had a bit of a dearth of gaming during the graduation trip you had to go on this last weekend. So I got onto your recent plays. I don't know how up to date you keep that, but I know that you kept some in the last month at least, and I saw that of all the games that you put in there, I think that you've kind of hit on most of them recently, except for you brought up Gloomhaven for the topic of this episode. So you had 3 plays in the last month, which kind of surprised me because I thought you'd already finished the campaign.
No, we're like on the final stretch. We're like approaching the very end of the campaign.
Do you consider that a good thing or a bad thing?
We're basically we have the final scenario unlocked. We're just cleaning up all the side quests first.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I figured you wanted to do maybe a little bit more gloom hating.
I can review it, sure.
Well, you also had the other one I saw there was the Lord of the Rings, the card game, and I haven't heard anything about that game in like ages.
I can talk about that too.
I don't know. Are they even still putting stuff out for it?
Yep, sure are.
Okay. And is there any change in direction? Or they?
I don't know what you mean by that, but
they added a dexterity element where you have to flick a ring into the crack.
Well, the last cycle all took place in a desert, and you have a second dial that keeps track of your temperature. And if you get above a certain temperature, you die.
Okay, so it added an extra thing to manage and a way to manage it as well, which seems kind of cool. I was kind of wondering and curious if they did more of this sort of like the campaign style things. I know that they kind of did that mainly with the canon base, with the actual like book based of quests, right? Where they would be like, you start here, and then this is like 3 quests where you actually track and conserve states and stats between.
That actually has 18 parts.
Mm-hmm.
It's 6 per book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Okay. So so there's 6 per book, 6 boxes of 3 missions each, or 6
boxes of 3 missions each. They're all interlinked. They pass cards back, and I mean, your earlier results pass cards to the later scenarios.
And that's the way that the entire thing works. Like, you could play 54 scenarios in a row and have them totally from the beginning to the end.
I can talk about that. That's actually kind of cool how that works.
I didn't even know that. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of them sitting here, but it's just, it became overwhelming for me to have to build 2 decks every time. And then, when I started seeing my brother less frequently with him get his life sort of getting busy and stuff, I just didn't have a partner either. So yeah, and then I told us.
Sure, I can talk about that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can kick into that then. I figured between Gloomhaven and I did see the Lord of the Rings card game, so I creeped on you a little bit, Trent. But it was totally above the surface there. Stuff that you put out and yeah. But I did definitely, there's a few other little bits that I got, but we'll just slowly reveal those as I start stealing your identity. Yeah, I'm gonna start asking you about, like, hey, how was the beef stroganoff last night? I didn't know Sarah was going to pull that one off twice in the same month.
And I would say I didn't eat it because I'm vegetarian.
Of course. I mean the beef soyganoff, the soyganoff. Of course. I mean, come on, Trent. We already knew this.
Yeah.
and you washed it down with some booch. How's the gut?
Everything's good. Everything's good. I'm not having some of the problems Andy was discussing earlier. Let's put it that way.
I had nothing but problems.
There's a not creepy version of me somewhere. Yeah, but it's not. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, here we go. 3.
Used under Creative Commons license BY 2.0.